All right, welcome back to the Outlet Podcast with Gabe and Eric. I'm Gabe.
And I'm Eric. All right.
And again, I'm the guy on the right of the picture at the very beginning. I was thinking about it on our last episode. I wonder if people don't know
I feel
the
like
voice.
I feel like they can tell just by looking at
Yeah,
us. You know what I mean?
I have a little bit
you
deeper
have a beard,
voice.
you have a deeper voice.
Yeah.
I'm probably the guy with the high voice, you know?
Yeah, the higher voice,
Yeah.
Swedish.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we're going to talk about coronavirus.
Coronavirus, the big topic of the day. I
Yeah.
mean, it's been going on for a minute now. I feel like it in this whole conversation, we're just going to state a lot of things as fact, and they're not going to be true.
Yep.
But we're just going to go with it, okay?
As it usually does.
I mean,
we're ill-informed. Not ill-informed. We're not very well informed.
Ignorant.
Yeah.
But yeah, it started a couple of months ago in China in Wuhan, and I think it started because someone ate a bat.
Don't look at me, Eric.
If I'm not mistaken, yeah, some kind of wild animal that's not meant for consumption was consumed, and that's how it started.
Yeah.
And now it gets transmitted respiratorily, you know what I mean,
Sure.
through the air, so you just get coughed
coughs.
on, or you get breathed on a little too hard.
I've seen those
someone with
memes,
coronavirus.
you know.
Yeah,
Dude, my stocks and anyone else who's listening who's invested, they're terrible. They're
Yeah.
absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
I lost $200 in a week.
Yeah, I mean the
Out of
Dow
1,000,
Jones
so.
went down 1,600 points in
crazy.
one day, and which is hasn't happened since the Great Recession in 2008. So hey, man,
Substantial,
it's
man.
substantial, you know.
Seriously.
and
And this is the end of President Trump's, his 4-year term.
yeah,
Okay.
it's not looking good. And
Well, and here's the thing, because usually in history, when the economy is doing really well, the president gets elected again, because there's just more money out there, and the people like the president because he's doing good things for the economy.
Yeah.
But right now, if this trend continues, I don't know,
it's
man.
not looking good for Trump, And the thing is, the person that he's put in charge of fighting the coronavirus here in the U.S. is Mike Pence.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the man who doesn't believe in science, he just straight up doesn't believe in evolution. When he was, I think he was governor of Indiana, he let the HIV virus, AIDS, just spread like wildfire, just because he believed that this was God's revenge on
Gays.
on gays,
And Mike Pence himself is gay.
Yeah, that's
No,
that's
just
a little known fact. He has some dick on the side.
Yeah. I just threw that out there. Yeah, man.
heard it here.
He
You
doesn't
heard it
sound
here,
like a very
folks.
qualified guy to be in charge of that. That's for sure.
What experience does he have fighting pandemics? And the guy who has previously been in charge at the CDC of combating the AIDS virus here in America has actually been banned from making public statements by the White House. They're putting mufflers and muzzles on any qualified expert that is willing to speak out about the problem that we're actually facing, because Trump is just trying to whitewash the whole situation, saying that everything's fine, it's going to go away, just close your eyes, put your fingers in your ears, and it'll be fine. That's not the sort of response that we want to see to a global pandemic. Someone that is ill-informed, has no experience dealing with this sort of thing, and instead of delegating to experts who have experience with it, he's choosing his right-hand man who has little to no experience at all. And on top of that, the U.S. healthcare system is incredibly badly designed to combat this situation, right? Because in order to get tested for coronavirus right now, it costs around $3,000, right? So if you go in right now and get tested for coronavirus, you're going to get hit with a $3,000 bill. And what working class person who thinks they might have it is going to go in and get tested? Mm-hmm. And not only that, the vaccine for the coronavirus is almost $4,000. And so because the U.S. has a for-profit healthcare system that's standing in the way of the public's health when combating this issue, it's just going to exacerbate the problem, because, if it spreads in a community with low incomes, they are not going to go
get
tested,
get vaccines
voluntarily. It's going to have to be the government coming in and quarantining people once it's already too late.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, that's terrible. Like having $3,000 just going to get tested. That no one's gonna get tested.
No one's gonna get tested.
No one's
gonna get tested.
Yeah. And what happens if you get tested too? You get put in a cage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You just get detained and thrown into
no one has any incentive to help fight this virus that we're all at risk of.
That's terrible. Yeah, that's not good.
Yeah,
But on another point, don't you think that it's somehow a little bit overhyped?
Yeah.
That because not too long ago we had Ebola,
Yeah.
and Ebola was going to be the new pandemic. Everyone's gonna die.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And that fizzled over, and it's not. And now Ebola is treatable.
Yeah.
It still kills people.
Yeah.
Still kills people in Africa, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think it's kind of overhyped and it's kind of overblown?
Yeah, I mean,
somewhat?
I think that in terms of it being a world-ending pandemic where all of humanity is going to get wiped out, like that is not on the table right now. I mean, if you look at the numbers, only like 2,500 people have died from it, which is a lot. That's a significant amount of people, and bigger than most of the pandemics that we've had in the past 50 years or so. But there has been over 30,000 people that have been cured and released without the disease.
30,000.
Yeah.
Really?
And there's 40,000 people currently infected. So, it's a very low rate of death, and it's mostly people who are already sick and, old people or babies, right? Who gives a shit about them, right?
That's not what I was saying here.
No. But yeah, it's not the sort of world-ending pandemic like the Black Death, right?
Yeah.
Where 1/3 of Europe just died,
Dead.
right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be that sort of thing, but it's still going to have a significant impact on the world and the world economy. And I mean, now that it's spread out of China, Iran and Italy are big countries that have a significant amount of cases that are spreading faster and faster by the day. And now U.S. has 60 confirmed cases, and not every one of them are in quarantine. And who knows how many people just think they have the flu but are out there and actually have the coronavirus. So I think that it's not the real impact won't be the number of people that die from it, but just sort of the effects of fear that comes with the pandemic.
Yeah.
Right. That
Yeah.
businesses shut down, people stop going to work, people stop leaving their houses, and the economy grinds to a halt. And the way of life that we have been accustomed to is no more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it already has significant impact on the world economy already. Because as I earlier mentioned, the stock market is just terrible.
Yeah.
The worst I've seen in a while.
Yeah.
That's not good.
Yeah, and I mean a big reason for that is because China has, or the Chinese government has basically moved mountains in order to put a stop to this pandemic, because China is a country that is extremely susceptible to large infectious diseases like this, just because it has so many people living in dense urban centers, right? You'll have 10,000 people living in a half-mile radius, and yeah, so they've basically put a halt on all normal activities in all of the affected regions. They have, and it's really kind of shocking and dystopian to see videos of the military going and welding bars on the doors of people's apartments, telling them you can't leave, and we're gonna make you not leave. Right?
It's definitely disconcerting.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, that's what it's taken to stop this disease. And the rate of infection has decreased steadily in China under the past few months, and it seems like they have a pretty good hold on it. Now, that being said, there's tens of thousands of people that are still infected in China. However, they have allocated the resources, pretty much all the doctors in the country that are not required in their home provinces have been moved to affected provinces and are working on curing the affected patients. And yeah, and the thing is, I just feel like, because the Chinese state is so centralized and, goal-minded, right, where if the entire Chinese state sets its mind to curing the coronavirus, they're going to use every opportunity and every tool that they have in their toolbox to stop that. They'll stop all the trains, they'll shut down all the businesses, they'll weld people into their apartments, right? And that's the sort of measures that it seems like it's going to take to, put a stop to this pandemic, as opposed to the U.S. government, where we can't even guarantee the vaccine to everybody, right? We can't even guarantee that if you think you have it, you can get a free test, right? The simplest steps towards stopping this virus aren't even going to be taken because of the diverse interests in the U.S. government, and doing so would step on some pharmaceutical companies' toes. And there's a congressman in Congress that has been getting campaign contributions from them, and vetoes that bill, right? And so at the end of the day, nothing gets done until it's much too late, and it's become a full blown pandemic in this country.
I didn't even consider that. I bet the pharmaceutical companies are. I don't know if they're worried. I mean, they probably feel that there's profit to be made in coronavirus.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's why they're charging $3,000 for the vaccine and the test.
Sure.
And the person that's been in charge of the vaccine and the test is actually a pharmaceutical executive, right? He has worked in pharma for his whole life, and he was recently hired by the CDC to be in charge of that program, and certainly not a qualified. I mean, he might be qualified. He might not know a lot about pharma, but he has an incentive to overcharge the American people and continue to rake in profits for his former employers. That I'm sure he's going to go right back to that job after this one and get a big pay boost.
Man, that ties.
I'm getting conspiratorial here.
No, it doesn't sound conspiratorial. I can completely see how that would work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at this point, I feel like there's no doubt that there's some form of corruption that's taking place in government, and it seems like the coronavirus, it may be overhyped, it may be kind of pushed to be worse than it actually is, but in order to have a proper response to something that could be potentially deadly, there needs to be a hyper response by the people to prevent that. I mean, and it makes complete sense that China's taking all these measures to try and stop it, because China has been, correct me if I'm wrong, but super interested with its sustainability. How it's going to sustain its economy, how it's going to sustain its people, how it's going to sustain their political system, and all this, right?
Yeah.
And so they see the coronavirus as a national security threat. Excuse me. And so they're having a hyper reaction to the coronavirus in order to continue this national security. In America, we care about national security if it's only in our interest, right? Yeah. And so we can write things off as national security when they're not actually national security for oil or whatever.
Yeah.
But on a whole, it seems like China's a lot more concerned with national security than America.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, what gets painted as national security in America often doesn't really concern, the actual defense of our nation. I mean, if you think about it, America is one of the most easily defensible nations in the world. I mean, we are straddled by two massive oceans, right, which almost no power would be able to sustain a war, supplying logistics across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. And then on the top and bottom, we have strong allies. The chances of Mexico or Canada invading us are slim to none,
Sure.
So in when you talk about national security, it's never about actually defending our nation, right? It's defending American hegemony over the world, right?
Yeah.
So whenever our interests are threatened in the Middle East or in Southeast Asia or in Eastern Europe, that's when it's a national security interest, because, excuse me, national security is conflated with American hegemony,
Yeah, definitely. And I think, also that goes along with the kind of the governing ideology behind America and trying to spread that ideology across the world, right? We see this in the Cold War, but this kind of been a continuation of the Cold War, spreading the democratic and free enterprise ideal. And whenever we see around the world, especially in like Vietnam or Korea, for instance, that those ideals that America is upholding, their ideology that governs them is being threatened in some way, they call it a national security.
Yeah.
Which is not true. I mean, at that point, we were not afraid that Vietnam was going to invade America.
No, not at all. And I don't know. I'm generally skeptical of the U.S.'s use of the term democracy when invading foreign countries, right? Because the justification is always, we want to uphold peace, and we want to uphold democracy, right? That's the justification that's given to the American people. However, when you actually look at, what America does, in many cases, it's subverting democracy, right? Like if you look at the U.S.'s record in South America, anytime there's a left-leaning president elected, I mean, this past year, Evo Morales has been president of Bolivia for over 5 years now, and he has made significant steps in, reducing child mortality, increasing the literacy rate, raising the standard of living, good solid things that I think we can all objectively agree are good things for a country, right? Helping the poor people of Bolivia, which have been impoverished for a long time, and not collapsing the economy, continuing to have the lithium flow out at a reasonable rate. However, some of that lithium was being taxed at a rate that U.S. battery companies found, unacceptable, basically. And this past year in 2019, the CIA engaged in a coup, right, where they and the Organization of American States said that the most recent election in Bolivia was undemocratic, right, and that even though Evo Morales won, that those results should not be respected and counted. And instead, they installed their right-wing military leader, right, who ruled the country up until very recently, where they held another election where Evo Morales was not on the ticket at all because he had fled the country because he feared he would be assassinated by the CIA. And that is what is done in our name, in the name of democracy and in the name of peace. And to me, it's the complete opposite. We are subverting democracy for our own, big money interests, right? The people that benefited from that coup were companies like Tesla, companies like
Duracell,
basically any company that
or whatever.
uses lithium in their batteries, right? And at the end of the day, what hurt was Bolivian democracy and the Bolivian people, because now all of a sudden, instead of having a good technocratic leader who was focused on, raising the standards of living of the people of Bolivia, we have an American puppet who is focused on cranking out as much lithium for as cheap as possible.
Yeah, man, we've messed up those. Yeah,
right?
Well, and it's a complete lie if that's true. I mean, it's a complete lie.
Mm-hmm. And recently, I saw this interesting article. So during the coup, the Washington Post and the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, as is expected in manufacturing consent by Noam Chomsky, they took the party line. They said that Bolivia's democracy is no longer democratic, and we shouldn't respect the results of the election. We should support, this military coup essentially that's happening. And recently, within the past few weeks, the Washington Post came out with a second article saying that there was actually nothing wrong with Bolivia's democracy in the first place. Man. There was nothing to be worried about, and we just jumped the gun.
It makes my blood boil when I hear things like that, because I'm listening to the book too, and it's there's a lot of things that he points out where the journalism, the stuff that people see, the media, is put forth in a way that is meant to confuddle the actual truth, and it does it in this way that's somewhat subverted and isn't easily found, the truth behind, and it really it's lazy journalism. It's journalism with a goal in mind.
Yeah, not the truth.
Not the truth.
A geopolitical interest. Right?
That's right, geopolitical.
Yeah,
messed up. And we have messed up the South American countries in so many different ways. Like, the banana republics that happened.
Yeah, in Honduras and Guatemala. And yeah, and I mean, like...
We've just been exploiting them for resources since, what, Teddy Roosevelt?
Yeah. Yeah, since the Monroe Doctrine. I mean, any time a slightly left-wing leader, not even talking about, the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, but someone who has the goal of improving the lives of the working people of their country comes into power, they immediately become a threat to American, quote-unquote, national security, right? And they become, they get put on the CIA hit list, and as soon as there's an opportunity or there's a crack in their administration, the CIA swoops in, calls the election undemocratic, they back the opposition forces, and the American media steps into line, says that this nation is undemocratic and that we should support this coup, and before you know it, that, experiment with democracy is crushed, and there's, they're back to military dictatorship, where, a couple of local families run an oligarchy, and U.S. corporations rake in all the money from that country.
Yeah, well, and there's a specific story that comes to mind when I'm thinking about this. I think it was under Teddy Roosevelt with the whole Nicaraguan thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was Teddy Roosevelt, right?
Nicaragua?
Yeah, with exploiting like bananas and Chiquita banana and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's that exploitation's been going on for a while, but the Sandinistas rose up under Reagan.
Reagan,
Yeah.
okay. Well, I believe there was a church that got raided by the the
Contras?
Yeah, the Contras. That's right. And something like 3 or 4 nuns died, or whatever, were killed in the raiding, and it headlined like everywhere that 3 or 4 nuns died because of these Contras, which is terrible. It's terrible, but it was a terrible misrepresentation of what the Contras were actually trying to do, and it represented a very small portion of those people. And it got completely conflated to say that these people are complete evil, and that there needs to be some American intervention into. This is all very vague because I don't know the specifics, but what we tend to do as America is we tend to focus on a few cases of extreme action taken by the people, and we like to say that was bad. Therefore, we should change the entire structure of the civilization because of it.
Yeah,
that's very lazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think that America tends to rely too heavily on its military and its spy agencies, essentially. I mean, instead of if there is a country that is opposed to American interests and allies with American enemies, instead of trying to coax that country and wine and dine them, essentially, the way that, China does now, we just always resort to violence, essentially, right? The only option is either a full-blown military invasion, like in Iraq, both times, or an assassination, where the CIA comes in and kills that leader and expects a democracy to flourish, right? As opposed to taking all that money that is spent on bombs and killing the people of that country and spending it on investments in that country that would sway the opinion in Americans, in America's
Sure, which
favor.
would be ultimately desirable for both countries.
For both countries, yeah, because it, grows that market, right? And now that there's a new market for American goods and there's a strong American ally with a better economy, and instead of, murdering hundreds of millions, or not hundreds of thousands of people, although when you put them all together, probably are hundreds of millions of people that we've killed, all for what, right? At the end of the day, that country gets worse off, and we usually don't have a strong American ally there.
Sure, and then usually a political dictator rises up again and then assumes the power.
Yeah, because I mean, the thing is that changing the structure of a society is one of the hardest things that you can do, and you definitely can't do it through invasion, and it takes a long, drawn-out process of incentivizing the rulers to switch to, not switch, but shift in the direction that you want them to, and by, assassinating a leader and expecting a democracy to flourish, what ends up happening is that country falls into the same patterns that it's been in for over 50, 100 years. And it's really kind of disheartening. And the thing is that as American voters, we don't really have a say on this issue, right? We never have a vote on America's foreign policy, because the Democrats and the Republicans take the same positions, right? They, the Democrats like to say that they're anti-war, and they like to say that they, encourage peace, as opposed to the Republicans. But if you look at the actual results of Democratic administrations, they are just as hawkish and they are just as, warmongering as any Republican. I mean,
sure,
Obama had an army of drones that were just murdering children all over the world. And, I think I respect him and all that, but at the end of the day, he did not change the course of American foreign policy, and he continued to uphold the, murderous, violent precedent that has been established. The reason Libya is in chaos right now and is split, between 6 different factions who are fighting guerrilla wars over the oil resources of that country is because Hillary Clinton and Obama assassinated Muammar Gaddafi in 2009. No, 2011. And yeah, I just think it's really disheartening that, yeah, us, the American voter, have absolutely no say in the way that we act abroad in our name. I mean, all of these actions are being taken in the name of regular Americans, and I really don't think that they represent the viewpoint of regular Americans.
Yeah. I completely agree. Yeah, it really comes back to what Lyndon B. Johnson talked about when we started pumping millions and millions and billions of dollars into the military. It's like, well, I mean, the only reason people give billions and billions of dollars to something is so that they can use it as an investment. And when you continually dump all this money into the military, what it promotes is the expansion of its resources by invasion of another company. And to your point about the CIA, I actually don't know too much about what the CIA actually does in its foreign policy. Are you serious? Do you really mean like they go into another countries and just assassinate the leader of the country if they don't like him?
All the time. I mean, like one good example is maybe like assassinate is not always the best option for them, right? Sometimes it's easier to back a military coup and have the members of the armed forces in that country
assassinate them.
Yeah, do it themselves, right? But at the end of the day, it is the CIA pulling the strings behind the scene. And the thing is, the CIA is purposefully opaque, right? You're not meant to know what the CIA does, right? You just assume that they are protecting American interests and, that they do something with the billions of dollars that they're given every year. But they're a completely independent institution. There is no democratic control on the CIA at all. And, the CIA has been shown to intervene even in American politics at home several times. I mean, I'm going to get a little conspiratorial here, but, the assassinations of powerful revolutionary figures during the 60s had connections to the CIA. I mean, MLK, they all like to say that the person that killed him was a lone wolf, right? However, there has been, over the 50 years that have passed since, documents have been released to show that lone wolf had connections with America's intelligence agencies. Now, am I saying that the CIA killed MLK? Maybe. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the thing is that the CIA, it's
you sound real tin-hatted right now.
Yeah. No, I know. But the thing is, I don't know, if you really want to, I don't know, look into the CIA's track record, they have done, appalling things in the name of American national security. And the thing is, there's no oversight. There's no overview. They're a completely independent institution that is able to do whatever they want with the, massive amount of resources that they're given by the Pentagon, with no checks or no control, right? The American people and, the American voter have no idea what the CIA is doing, and there's no way we can ever, put a stamp on it or control what they're doing. I mean, they run torture sites all over the world, in Thailand, in Bangladesh, in Cuba. I mean, there's a reason that we don't know what they're doing, and it's because often, if we did know, we would not support it, right?
Man, it's a very interesting point. Like I mean, one of the reasons why they're opaque is because people don't talk about it. Like, I've never had this conversation like the CIA, maybe, because there's no checks and balances in the CIA. There's no one regulating what happens in the CIA. No. Maybe they're actually just doing terrible things all the time. Yeah. And we don't know anything about it.
No idea. And as soon as somebody in the American government makes a stand against them,
it's like they're gone.
They are gone, right? Because the CIA has so many resources, and they have the people that know how to get rid of people, right?
Yeah.
Not saying kill them, but they can destroy a career very quickly because they have all the strings, they have all the connections, and very quickly you can find your career in the toilet. And
so they're basically using fear as a means to keep their power. Yeah. Well, I mean, Who knows,
Who
right?
knows? Exactly. Like the thing is, like we have
No idea, 'cause they're so opaque.
It's so opaque and blatantly untransparent.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like talking about like assassinating leaders, right? I'll talk about Iran, right?
Okay.
So Iran had a prime minister that nationalized the oil in the country, right? Meaning that all of Iran's oil resources were essentially taken away from the foreign investors that own them and were put to use for the Iranian people, so that money that was being taken out of their country could be put back into their country, right? And it was a big hit to British and American oil companies because there's a lot of oil in Iran. And immediately, almost 2-3 years after that happened, he died. And the Shah, the royal person, aristocrat, came back into power and gave all that oil right back to BP and ExxonMobil and Shell.
Man.
Right.
Look,
Now,
dude, whenever money's involved, there's gonna be some maneuvering.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
like we're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars of oil money that is just not in American pockets.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, you see these gangsters, right? You know, the gangster movies where they say, you're going to take Timmy out or whatever. Here's $5,000. This is just on a large scale.
Yeah.
Where instead of, paying some hitman to take Timmy out, you pay the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
You give them big political donations, or
Mm-hmm.
not political donations, but,
You just increase their budget every
discretionary
year,
spending or
which we
whatever.
have done.
Yeah.
Every single year, pretty much, Democrat or Republican.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then you say, hey, this South American leader, we don't like him. Figure out what to do with him, because he's costing us billions and billions of dollars in, lithium battery money or whatever.
Yeah.
I totally see that.
Yeah.
And America has been doing that for a very long time.
Yeah.
When the money's at stake, we change,
Yeah. And to continue ragging on the CIA here for a second, like
They're not listening.
I don't know, man. Like I'm getting a little spooked right now because they are scary, bro. And I wouldn't be surprised if all of my career avenues got shut down because of this little conversation we're having right now talking about the CIA. But in the 80s, the CIA approached Congress to try to increase funding for the Contras in Nicaragua that were fighting the Sandinistas. And Congress said no because the American public was generally against that war. It was been proven that the Contras were bad people fighting these communists and that we didn't want to support them. So the CIA had to find another way to get money to them. And you know what they did? They started selling cocaine. This is not a joke, man.
This is mainstream news.
This yeah, it was reported in the San Jose Times, some newspaper in San Jose. Yeah, essentially they started importing cocaine from Panama and selling it into the inner cities, and the drug dealers in these inner cities turned that cocaine into crack. And
created the whole crack epidemic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that they're the only ones to blame. I mean, there were other drug dealers selling cocaine into the U.S. at the same time. However, they were responsible for a massive influx of cocaine into the U.S., all to fund a murderous regime that was fighting the democratically elected regime
man.
In Nicaragua. I mean, that's about as reprehensible as it gets, right?
Yeah.
Destroying the American people to support American quote unquote national security.
Oh
right?
man.
And there's and no one was ever arrested for that.
Sure.
No one ever.
There's no repercussions.
No repercussions at all because the CIA is an independent, unchecked institution that can pretty much do whatever it wants, and if anyone questions that.
Wasn't there this weird case where I shouldn't say Americans, but some agency in our government started infecting people with syphilis? Did you hear about that? No? Okay. Never mind. I might be crazy.
No,
I probably heard it on Alex Jones.
I believe it. I mean,
I don't know. There was something weird where people got infected by syphilis. I wish we had someone to pull this up first, but
yeah, dude. I mean, it's so crazy. Like when you read about the things that the American government has done, right, in the name of national security and in the name of, promoting our military hegemony, you get real tin-hatted. You know what I mean? And I hate to be, one of those people that's just like, it's all conspiracy. Bush to 9/11. You know what I mean? Like
NASA's breaking
yeah, exactly. Where's Tower 11? Huh? There was thermite in the towers.
Yeah.
But like when you read about all this stuff, you're like, holy shit, we've like
I
legitimately.
love how I naturally did an Alex Jones impression.
Yeah, exactly. Just because that's
He's
our,
the
that's
guy,
our, he's the guy. You know?
Sorry, go on.
By the way, he went to a Bernie Sanders rally recently in Austin. And he's just ridiculous, bro. He's just like he's got this like armored truck that he's bought, and he's just like driving around the streets of Austin with a bullhorn, being like, "Bernie Sanders is a communist. Like, we don't want communism," and like just crazy stuff. And like, he's
Alex
dude's
Jones,
nuts.
he's nuts.
Like he's past his prime of like relevancy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like in like 2016, 2017, everyone was like, "This dude's crazy," huh?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and now everyone's
And
like,
he's just like, he's still crazy.
he's still nuts. He's getting crazier. And
Have you heard some of his arguments that he makes?
Like I try to listen to him as little as possible. I feel like listening to Alex Jones is just like giving yourself like a little bit of brain radiation. You know what I mean?
I
just
see
like
that
willingly.
I see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But oh my goodness, his evidence for his arguments is like, yeah, my grandfather said this. Like, that's his evidence.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
I heard this from my grandfather.
Yeah. But to be
Sounds
honest,
credible, right?
our evidence is just I read it on the internet. You
Yeah,
know what
exactly.
I mean?
I
So we're not much more credible, eh? But like,
I gotta pull it. I gotta say it.
yeah. It's okay though.
We're all right. We're
We're-
talking.
yeah,
At least we're rational, right? We're
Yeah,
trying to
at least
talk.
we try to think so. I don't know.
What were we
But
talking
also,
about
but
before?
also, we have no audience. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
when we say something, it has literally like no effect.
There's
on
no-
the world at all.
Definitely.
As opposed to Alex Jones actually has like a pretty significant army of like just other cuckoo people sitting in their basements, just like, yeah, Sandy Hook was a hoax. I'm gonna go dox the parents of the children that died. Like, the shit he says has a real effect on the world. You know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
feel like there is some disparity there, right? But
Yeah, I mean,
don't know.
well, that's for sure. I mean, we're definitely not.
we're not.
And again, like the points that we're making are a lot more tame than the points Alex Jones is making. Like
Oh,
the
definitely.
frogs are turning gay. From
Yeah,
chemicals
yeah,
or
the
whatever, like-
chemicals, right?
yeah. Oh my goodness.
Turn the freaking frogs gay, right?
Dude, oh my goodness. Sometimes,
Whoa.
dude, here's the thing. I see Alex Jones simply as an entertainer.
Yeah.
He's an entertainer. You know?
Yeah.
And like, for the person who's actually sane,
Yeah.
right? I think it's fine to listen to Alex Jones and just have a good laugh because it's honestly he's so entertaining.
Yeah, he's very entertaining. Yeah.
What were we talking about before?
I don't know idea, bro. We got down the Alex Jones.
We got down the
into-
CIA. That's where we were.
CIA, bro. I don't. I'm cautious to talk about the CIA like
Because
this,
you
bro.
want to have a political.
Yeah, dude. I don't want to fuck with them, bro.
Yeah.
Like that's like
That is the last people
they're like
you want to mess with.
yeah, scary as shit, bro. Like
Yeah.
they kill people on the regular. You know what I mean? And like. Obviously, like,
They
they're
have
not gonna kill.
torture-
They're not gonna kill me. You know what I mean? I'm just a
Well.
fucking teenager sitting in a garage,
Who
like,
knows, Eric?
yeah, I don't know, bro.
Well, maybe. Well, here's the thing. You want to have a political. I don't know. What's the right term? You want to be in politics.
Yeah, man, like that's I don't know. That's what I'm passionate about, and I feel like I don't know. I feel like I can help improve people's lives doing that, and like I feel like if your passion overlaps with that,
It's good.
being able to improve people's lives, like that's what you should do. And
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
know,
That's
I
why
just-
people have midlife crises.
Yeah.
Because they're doing something that isn't really impacting the world in any substantial way.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
they-
They're working a boring office job and
Right,
just
yep.
grinding it out 9 to 5 because that's what they've been told they should do, and like.
Well, there's many reasons why people have midlife crises. That's one of them.
Yeah.
But
Although it does help the Mustang market. When dads have midlife crises, they gotta get a Mustang, huh?
oh man, that's funny.
Yeah, or Harley, right?
Or Harley, one of the
One of the
two.
two.
Yeah. Or a big truck. I don't know.
Big trucks too. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
What are we
man.
talking about?
Dude, I have no fucking clue. I got lost, bro.
Let's move on.
Let's
to
talk
something.
about India.
That's right.
Yeah. So right now, there's a lot of religious conflict in India, and President Trump is in India right now. He's in New Delhi, and there's been riots in that city where over like 300 people have been killed in clashes between Muslims and Hindus in that country. And the reason is Narendra Modi, the current prime minister, has passed a law making it so that being a Hindu is a requirement for Indian nationality. So in order to become a citizen in India, you have to be a Hindu, right?
Whoa.
And
There's a substantial amount of Muslims.
there's a substantial amount. I mean, like, the Brits did split India and Pakistan and Bangladesh, and there was it was supposed to separate, Muslims and Hindus. However, there has been a significant Muslim minority in India ever since, right? Because some people live far
and a Christian minority too in the south,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, I mean, India is an extremely diverse place, right?
1 billion people there, man.
Millions of people, like hundreds of different languages, tons of different cultures, right? But Hindu is the biggest religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Narendra Modi, in order to
He tried to set up a theocratic system?
yeah, I mean, basically because India is a democracy, right? And in order to hold on to power, he needs a bigger part of parliament. And he thought that him and his party, the BJP, thought that in order to basically rile up their voters, which were Hindu voters, they needed to essentially, enforce theocracy and, fire up the Hindu nationalists of the country to go out and vote and to repress the Muslim minority, which largely vote against them, right? And so
jeez, that's terrible.
over the past half year or so, there's been just riots all over the place where, secular students who might be Hindus or might be Muslims are standing up for the rights of, a secular society that, we don't want a return to, fascism, essentially, is what this is, by, tying together nationality and religion and making that a core part of the Indian identity. And of course, Muslims have, taken a strong stand against this because it essentially makes them second-class citizens in their own country, right? And there's just been massive riots and massive deaths, essentially, and there's basically I'm gonna draw a lot of analogies to the 20th century fascists, but which is not totally accurate and fair, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because Narendra Modi's government is not nearly as powerful as the National Socialist Party in Germany or Mussolini's Fascist Party. However, they have a extrajudicial military, essentially, of Hindu nationalists who go to these rallies, go to the anti-BJP rallies, and beat people up. Right, they go out in uniforms, right, wearing their white shirts and their khaki pants, and they fight people in the name of the BJP, and of course the police,
without any, talking to the people, without any court system or anything.
No, they're entrenched in their views, right? They believe that to be Indian is to be a Hindu, and that's the way it should be, and we're gonna enforce that, right? And of course the police are generally on the side of the BJP, because they're an arm of that government, and they are mostly Hindu as well, sit by and do nothing, right? And so these brown shirts essentially is what they are, the military wing of the BJP, are allowed to go out and, beat up and kill students and protesters and people that are standing up for a secular society without any sort of repercussions at all.
That is
I think
terrible.
It's really scary. You know what I mean? Like the fact that
seriously.
our world's biggest democracy is falling into the hands of fascism is really a sign that fascism, despite being dead in name, right? No countries claim to be fascist anymore. That sort of died out in the 20th century. The nationalist and religious fervor that resulted in fascism in the 20th century is still very much alive, and it's being used as a tool to cement political power in countries all over the world.
Yeah, well, that is crazy. I mean, I thought the whole freedom of religion debate was somewhat over within society, in that
think so, yeah.
we had figured out that, in order to have a functioning society, we must at first agree that one religion shouldn't be enforced, right? Because when you have enforced religion, you ultimately will have opposition.
Mm-hmm.
And when I almost see this as a precursor to genocide too, because it's not super far off to believe that Hindus are somewhat superior to Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
and that Muslims should be eradicated from the country.
Yeah.
Because they're seen as not citizens.
Yeah. I mean, it's already happening, right? Muslims are being killed in these riots, right?
I'm talking like mass genocide.
I mean, totally, by the government, right? And this is just a precursor to that, right?
Definitely.
Like if you look at Kristallnacht, right, in Nazi Germany, where Nazi supporters went and smashed all of the windows of Jewish shops, right, and tried to drive Jews out of their towns and their homes. That was extrajudicial. It was not. I mean, it was sanctioned by the government, right? But it was not a government initiative. It was just the racist base of the Nazi Party, as well as some SS officers, and there was obviously government backing for this, but a majority of it was just the racist base of the Nazi Party.
Yeah, well,
enacting racial hegemony and
That's right.
Religious hegemony in their own hands, right? They
Mhm.
they believed in the ideology of the Nazi Party, and they took it upon themselves to enforce that, right? And the same
Yeah.
thing is happening in India today, right?
Sure, and I'm sure that people that are Hindu see Muslims as a threat to the country.
I mean, not all of them, right?
Definitely, yeah. I'm not trying to characterize all of them.
There are
no.
moderate Hindus, and
That's
there are certainly Hindus that are sticking up for a secular
But there
society.
certainly are as well, extreme Hindus who believe that there needs to be a, somewhat of a purging of Muslims within the society itself.
Yeah.
So it isn't far off to believe that if tensions continue to grow between the two, Hindu and Muslim, that there could be a mass. Well, I mean, like you said, there's already deaths.
Mm-hmm.
There could be a mass, genocide between these people.
Definitely. I mean,
Because that's usually how it starts. Is because it usually starts with one group that has more power, or not necessarily more power, but more people rather, saying that the opposition, whether that be Jews or Hutus or whatever it is, right?
yeah, whatever minority group.
Whatever minority group
Yeah.
is somewhat oppressing us, and we need to eradicate them.
Yeah. And where this, where a lot of this animosity comes from is from the British rule, right? When the Brits ruled, the British Raj, as it was called at the time, they ruled through the Muslim minority, and this is a technique used by colonizers throughout history, right? So all of the local officers that were in charge of controlling this colony were Muslim, and the reason for doing that is because the Muslims were a minority in India. They didn't have the opportunity to break free from the Brits, right? Because they knew that they wouldn't be able to establish their own independent Muslim state. So they knew they had to rely on British military power and British colonial power in order to maintain their high positions in society, as opposed to if the Brits ruled using Hindu officers and Hindu bureaucrats, then they
could rely upon
they could see the opportunity to break
Sure.
free on their own and create a independent Hindu state. However, the Muslims did not have that opportunity. So Muslims were given power by the British above the Hindu majority, and so that's where a lot of this resentment is left over from. Now it's been, largely evened out, and those Muslim groups have not really held on to their power into India's independent state. A lot of that power went to Pakistan and Bangladesh. However, that resentment is still very much alive in India today.
Huh, man. There's a lot to speak of about that. Yeah, what is President Trump doing there?
Securing an arms deal. We're gonna sell a lot of weapons to India.
The Hutu, not the Hutu,
Hindus,
Hindus, or the well, probably not the Muslims, but
just the government.
Just the government.
Yeah.
And the government's backed by the Hindus.
Yeah. I mean, the BJP is a conservative party with Hindu nationalist roots that relies on Hindu nationalist fervor to get electoral power. Right?
Why are they arming themselves?
Why are they arming themselves? Against China, really. I mean, India is China's biggest geopolitical rival on the continent of Asia, and through the One Belt One Road project, they have done a good job of, I say good job from a Chinese perspective, obviously, of encircling India. Because if you look at some of the biggest investments from China within Asia, it's been in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, right? Which are the three countries that sort of border India.
Yeah,
right?
that wrap around the top part of the peninsula.
So they've created a triangle of not military allies yet, although Pakistan is now a Chinese military ally, but with Chinese investment, there is always asterisks, right? And what China has done is they've given loans that they know these countries cannot repay. and they finance projects that they know in the end, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and Pakistan are not going to be able to repay. And once that happens, they are going to be able to gain stipulations, right? And they are already building a military port in Gwadar in Pakistan. And I would not be surprised at all. In fact, I think this is the course of action that is, most beneficial for, Chinese geopolitical interests, is to build military ports in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka as well. And by doing that, they will be able to essentially surround India navally, because invading them through the Himalayas is not a reasonable option, right? So instead, they are gaining allies on the Indian subcontinent, and will be able to fight that potential war on India's turf. And so India is essentially gearing up and getting ready for that potential fight,
Huh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and they've gone out and made a bunch of military alliances with all China's other geopolitical rivals, like Japan and America and Australia, to prepare for the case of a war between the two. However, India does have a very large military. However, it's not nearly as technologically advanced as China, and they don't have their own military industrial complex within India. So they're reliant on mostly Russian arms. However, they are looking to the U.S. to bolster their arsenal and prepare for that potential war with China.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, geopolitics is always interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, China usually, the difference between foreign investments within China and America is that America usually uses force to gain geopolitical advantage, and China uses its money and its investments for that.
Definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, it is just different forms of imperialism.
Absolutely.
However,
it's just a continuization of imperialism and also somewhat of colonization too.
Yeah, definitely. However, in the process, Chinese allies materially benefit more than American allies, I would say. I mean, that's a broad, unrealistic statement to make. However, in the case of the countries on the Indian subcontinent, Pakistan was an American ally for a long time, and the reason for that is that we just sent them checks every year. We sent them like $300,000, just giving them money, right? However, China, on the other hand, is putting a lot more money into that, right? They are building railroads, they are building ports, they are building nuclear reactors, they are building, housing, they are, improving Pakistan's industrial complex. They are, essentially doing what they did in their own country in Pakistan. And there's opposition to that within Pakistan. Pakistan is a Muslim country, and it's pretty theocratic. Not officially, it's officially a secular country. However, it is essentially a Muslim country, and the Pakistani people have an opposition to the how do I say this nicely? What is happening in Xinjiang with the Muslims there? Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so a lot of the Pakistani people are opposed to becoming a Chinese ally. However, in a lot of ways, money speaks louder than principles, and it's hard.
In many cases, it does.
Yeah, it's it can be quite tough for a government to turn down essentially free investments in their country when the infrastructure is crumbling, and it's basically a guaranteed boost to their own economy. Yeah, I don't know. It's
There have been so
Tough
many
issue.
wars
Tough
throughout
issue.
history that's fought just for, well, I shouldn't say just for it, just, religious wants.
Mhm.
I want this whole society to be this religion.
Yeah.
And, it blows me away that there's still this idea that religious freedom should somewhat be outlawed because for the imposition of a certain religion itself. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, you would think that. I mean, like from our American perspective, it seems obvious that a secular society is better than a theocratic society. But I mean, if you really believe in the tenets of your religion,
Well, I wouldn't say America's secular.
officially we are. Right?
Okay, officially, but
And we do generally. I mean, California, I'll say, we do believe in the freedom of religion, and we don't try to impose our religion on others. I'll speak for myself. But there are a lot of places in America that if you don't go to church, you'll be ostracized from the community. You know what I mean? And I'm sure.
I say, is it fair for me to say that we're still governed by religious ideals in America?
I mean, I don't know. I think that there are certainly politicians that use that phrasing in order to rile up their base, right? And get them out to vote in their favor. However, I think that ultimately people pick and choose. They cherry pick religious ideals to further their own political interests and use it as justification. However, I don't think that there are a lot of politicians that make decisions purely on religion alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think
definitely, because
there are a lot of Republicans that say that, I'm a Baptist, and that's what informs my political decisions. However, I think that the facts speak for themselves, and justifying a needless war with another country is pretty unchristian in my perspective. Killing people
definitely
for money
not good.
is not Christian to me.
That's true. That's not good. But what I mean by we're still governed by religious ideals is, you've probably heard Judeo-Christian ethics, right? And how the West was built off of Judeo-Christian ethics. And I believe that. I think, during the Enlightenment thinkers were influenced by religious ideas, right? And America was built off the Enlightenment, and we like to proclaim that we're still following those Enlightenment ideals, but we may have somewhat strayed away from those principles that were established.
Yeah.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the Enlightenment was really a push away from religious ideals. It was a period where people questioned the established hierarchy of the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, and instead chose to make decisions based on reason and logic as opposed to the Bible, essentially, the way it had been in Europe for a long time. I mean,
okay.
now being raised in the extremely Christian society that they were in, a lot of them had to cite Christian, the Bible and Christianity. However, I don't know. I feel like as a whole, the Enlightenment was really a push away from Christianity, right? And not necessarily a wholesale push away from Christianity, but more of a skeptical interpretation of Christianity, that we shouldn't just take what the church says as granted. Instead, we should question and determine those things for ourselves through the use of reason and logic in order to find greater truth. And a lot of those thinkers did end up finding out that there was some truth in the Bible and there was some truth in Christianity. However, I feel like it was a secular push away from the Christian hegemony of medieval Europe,
Yeah, well, I see that for sure. I believe, although the Enlightenment thinkers definitely did push somewhat of secular ideals, they also continued the moral structure of Christianity as well, because we especially see this in our structuring of our Constitution, is that there a lot of truths that are in the Constitution itself are also truths from the Bible, right?
Yeah.
And our law is written somewhat similarly. I never get that word right.
Yeah, it's
but
okay, man. We mess up a lot of words.
That's true. But was also very similar to the, not 10 Commandments, but just the laws in the Bible, right? For instance, you shouldn't kill your neighbor or whatever. You should treat people like they want to be treated. And I mean, we can look at the opposition, or the complete opposite to this, which would be, somewhat of like the USSR, right? Where they outlawed religion outright. They said in Article 52 of the Penal Code, right? They said all gatherings, all communal gatherings are banned by the state, essentially, and that includes religion.
Yeah.
And so what I kind of see is when you sweep the rug out from under a person, right? They fall over, and that rug that was there to hold the person up was this idea that people should be treated equally, or not equally, but fairly, right? And what happened in the USSR is they wiped that away. That there should be no communication of the idea that people should be treated fairly, right? And there should be this reciprocity between people. And what ended up happening as a result of that is a lot of people died.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have that foundation behind them, that Christian foundation.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah.
Christian foundation kind of sounds like, you were raised in a Baptist church.
Yeah.
I mean, just the overarching idea that people should be treated like they want to be treated themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah. But I'm not necessarily on board with the fact that that's a Christian ideal. You know what I mean? I feel like that is, I don't know, it's an ideal that plenty of societies reach without the aid of organized religion. And I think that is, it's a principle that I accept and I try to live by despite me not being a Christian. And, that might be the product of the fact that I, grew up in a, Christian dominated society. But yeah, I don't know. And I don't know. I feel like going back to the term Judeo-Christian values, I feel like the term Judeo has been thrown in there only recently in order to justify a support for Israel. I mean, if you look at the wording of pretty much all the intellectuals up until the Reagan era, the phrasing was just Christian values, right? Christian, right? With no acknowledgement of Jews or Judaism. But the prefix Judeo was thrown in there to justify support for Israel and to sort of tie together Christianity and Judaism in a way that, geopolitically would provide for the support of Israel.
I didn't think about that. That's definitely possible. That's definitely possible. And, but all the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely see your point, right? That we live in a society that has largely been influenced by Christian values. However,
but I do. Let me interrupt real quick.
Yeah, of course, man.
I definitely see that this Christian foundation has been used for political maneuvering.
Yeah.
That politicians claim to be promoting Christian values, but are only using that for votes of those people.
Yeah.
And I think that's extremely expedient and not very good.
Yeah. And I mean, the American evangelical Christian voting bloc is an extremely powerful one, and if you can win over those evangelicals and get them to vote for you, you have a guaranteed seat of power, especially in a lot of, states in the South and the Midwest, right? So I feel like, yeah, like you said, it is politically advantageous to repeat those principles and to make a front that you are a true Baptist or a true Methodist or whatever it is for political power, but your actions largely speak against those principles. I don't know. I feel like
it's just not good.
Yeah,
it's just not good.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to something else. All right.
Yeah. What do you want to talk about?
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
It's been a week since we last talked about him.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
So you're going campaigning after this.
That's right. Yeah.
You're going out there and you're trying to help people and
Yeah.
sway their opinions.
Get them out to vote on Tuesday. I've been doing a lot. You know what I mean? Like pretty much every day for like 3 hours, I've been tabling at Mesa. Right. So we have like a little Bernie Sanders table set up, and I just pester people that are walking by. I'm like, hey, do you support Senator Sanders? Do you support Bernie? Do you support Bernie? And like 90% of people just like, no, just walk right by. And even if they're like, yeah, I do, they just keep walking. I'm like, yeah, come on,
cool,
come talk to me. You know what I mean? But we do get people in, and essentially now most of the deadlines have passed, but we were trying to register voters and get independent voters to request a Democratic crossover ballot so that they could vote in the Democratic primary. Now we're essentially just getting people out to volunteer, this weekend, because the election is on Tuesday, so we're in the final stretch here. But ultimately, the ultimate goal or the ultimate benefit of having a table is just visually reinforcing Bernie Sanders' grassroots supports. You know what I mean? There's no other table from any other political candidate, right? There's not a Pete table. There's not a Biden table on campus. There's not a Warren table, anything like that. So by, bolstering Bernie's name recognition, essentially, that's going to win over a lot of votes. Because the thing is, I like to think that American voters do research and, really look at the policy proposals and look at the details and, how this will affect the future of our country and, the track record and the, principles behind each presidential candidate. But a lot of them just vote on name recognition alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, seriously.
Like not a lot of people are going to vote for Amy Klobuchar because just no one knows who she is, right? They just don't recognize that name. However, if they do recognize Bernie Sanders' name, just from seeing him on campus, they might vote for him just on that fact alone.
Seems like Bernie Sanders is getting a lot of name recognition now.
Yeah, I mean, he's the front runner for sure, and never in U.S. political history has any presidential candidate won the first 3 elections in the primary ever, right?
Really? This is the first time?
It's the first time where someone's won the popular vote in all three caucuses and primary elections. And, South Carolina is tomorrow. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
And
how's it looking?
How's it looking? I mean, it looks like Biden's going to win, right?
Is that his home state?
No, it's really because, 2/3 of the Democratic voters in South Carolina are black, and essentially Biden has a connection with Obama because he was his vice president. So a lot of the older black voters in South Carolina are just going to vote for Biden on that fact, which is a oversimplification of the issue, but that's what my impression seems like. But if you look at the black voters under 40 years old in South Carolina, something like 60% of them support Bernie, right? So there is a generational split amongst the voters in South Carolina that is in Bernie Sanders' favor, right? So I think that if the young people in South Carolina come out to vote, Bernie might win it. I mean, I don't know. The thing is, we're not necessarily hoping for a win in South Carolina. We're more hoping that we're going to get really close to Biden and show that we can compete even in this state where Biden was, looking like he was just going to sweep the floor. But the thing is, there's not that many delegates in play in South Carolina as compared to Super Tuesday, where 40% of the country votes in on one day, right? So that's the real big election. That's the real big turning point of this campaign, is how well we do in Super Tuesday. And the thing is, Bernie is the front runner, and he is looking like he's going to win all of these elections. But the thing is, there's a rule in the DNC that in order to get the presidential nomination in Milwaukee outright, you need to have over 50% of the votes, right? So even if you get 49% and everyone else gets 15%, if you don't cross that 50% boundary, the party can reference a thing called superdelegates, right? Which are party insiders, big political donors, basically people that have lots of political connections within the Democratic Party, and they will end up deciding who gets the nomination. And
and we know who that'll be.
Yeah,
Bloomberg,
not Biden, or not Bernie. That's
Bernie.
for sure, right?
Well, yeah. I shouldn't say it's going to be Mike Bloomberg, but dude, he's already spent more money than any presidential campaign ever.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And we're not even that deep into the primary.
Not even.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous. The fact that he can think that he can just buy this election. I mean, the amount of popular support he has is little to none, right? Prior to him spending $500 million on ads or whatever, there was almost zero support for Bloomberg amongst the American working class, right? The people who should decide this election. However, when you spend that amount of money on YouTube ads and TV ads and, giving out flyers and giving out hats or whatever, once again, it goes back to that name recognition thing, right? That if someone is quote unquote a moderate, right, and just is opposed to Bernie Sanders, they might just end up voting for Bloomberg because he's the only other name that they recognize on that sheet.
seriously, man, it's a little concerning how American voters vote.
Yeah.
Like just off of name recognition, off of party affiliation. You know, like
Yeah. I mean, that's not the way it should go, right? But
no.
I mean,
And if you want it to go differently, then what's the most practical step to helping that problem? It's educating voters.
Yeah. But I don't know. I feel like also a big reason why a lot of Americans aren't really engaged in the electoral process is because they feel like they have no horse in the race, right?
Definitely.
I mean, my family and myself are, pretty politically engaged, and we're going to vote, Democrat no matter what, basically, just because we don't like the Republicans. And that's not really the way we should vote, right? If
No.
there is a good Republican candidate that, presents themselves, we should vote for them. But at the end of the day, we want to chip away at the Republicans' power as much as possible because they rule tyrannically and in a theocratic way and, repress the rights of minorities and women and all that bad stuff.
Yeah.
But-
well, I mean,
but
we can get into those points another time.
But ultimately, I think that a lot of back to the original point is that a lot of voters don't have any attachment to either particular party because no matter what party is in power, the material quality of life that they have, the structure of the institutions that rule them does not change, whether it's Clinton or Bush or Obama or Trump. There's, the material quality of their life is not affected at all. And I think that Bernie Sanders has really upended that status quo, right? Because he is putting proposals on the table that would drastically change the American way of life, right? He's proposing to eradicate the private healthcare system that hurts millions of, working Americans every single day. Thousands of Americans die or go bankrupt because of a lack of access to affordable healthcare, right? And he's proposing to change that, and that's not something that has been proposed and has been on the ballot in all of American history, right? That has never been something that you can vote on. You've never been able to vote on the healthcare system. That's always just been the status quo, and that's the way it is, right? Or student debt. He's proposing to eradicate student debt, make all public colleges and universities tuition free, right? That's never been something that you can vote on. That's just part of the status quo, right? All you've been able to vote on are these cultural issues, essentially, like abortion and gun control that get voters riled up, however, don't have any real effect on the institutional structure that affects the working, the lives of working Americans in this country. So by offering these really new and different alternatives to the status quo, Bernie Sanders is hoping to get people that usually aren't engaged in the political process into the voting booths on Tuesday and into, get voting in November, because they have the opportunity to really change their lives in the world that we live in,
Yeah, and it's all, from what I know, it's been all from these, like you said, grassroots people. It's not massive $billion donations or whatever. It's just people who are actually democratic in the way that they want to structure their lives and believe that the vote still has power and that I can truly impact the world in some way that I vote. I mean, not necessarily talking about the actual issues, itself, but just kind of the idea behind the issue.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders.
I mean, what do you think about some of his proposals? I'm sure you have some.
I just have
some caveats and some things that you want to.
Look, man. I mean, who doesn't want to have their student debt wiped away, and who doesn't want to have free college? That sounds great to me. I don't have to pay for college. Great. Who doesn't want to have health care that's provided for by the government?
Yeah.
As long as the government provides it adequately.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not, I can still choose my doctor. I don't have to go to, if I have open heart surgery, I don't have to go to Phil, who's only performed one open heart surgery, and the guy died. You know what I mean?
Fuck Phil, bro. Get him out.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, definitely, and that's part of his plan, right? Is that you got to keep your doctor right now. And the thing is, doctors don't like dealing with the private healthcare system, right? They want to spend as much time treating patients and improving people's health in their lives as possible. I mean, that's why they got into that career in the first place, right? Because they want to improve people's lives. And
Yeah.
the thing is, right now, they have to spend a significant amount of time billing insurance companies and dealing with all the bureaucracy that comes with, a private healthcare system, as opposed to treating patients the way they want to, right? And by cutting out the hundreds of middlemen that are involved and raking in big profits in our private healthcare system, you allow doctors to do what they want to do, which is treat patients as much as possible, right? So instead of having to spend, 20 minutes for every 1 hour procedure, typing away on a computer and inputting all the bills and the details of the procedure and the costs and, how much is it going to cost for the pharmaceutical drugs and, how much should we bill this insurance company and how much should we pay for the pharmaceutical companies, right? All of that is unnecessary at the end of the day for a doctor's duties themselves, but under our private insurance system and our private healthcare system, that's a necessary part of it, right? So by cutting out those middlemen, you're streamlining the healthcare process, and you're allowing doctors to do what they do best and what they really want to do.
Huh. Yeah, another
That's
concern.
just one little point that
No,
I
yeah,
feel
definitely.
like is not brought up enough. Like
Sure.
doctors want a universal healthcare system.
Yeah, definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
And maybe not some of the greedy doctors that get free golf trips from the pharmacy from overprescribing opiates.
Oh,
and,
yeah, definitely.
ADHD medication. Maybe they might have some opposition to it. But fuck those guys. They don't deserve to rake in that money.
Yeah.
But doctors that have good morals and genuinely want to help the people that they treat support a universal health
Which
care
I think is the
system.
majority.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Like no one.
yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say no one. I mean, there's definitely people. But if you're going 8 years to medical school and really pursuing a medical path, like you must have some care for the well-being of the person.
Yeah, definitely.
But dude, to your earlier point about time, I was talking to my dad the other day, and we were talking about how, I over at my grandmother's house, she lives in a place called Como, Mississippi, population like 1,000 or something, like a really, really small town in Mississippi that has one street that has all the shops on it. There's one stoplight, and that's it. There's just houses around it. She's got this beautiful land, like 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't know how many miles an acre is, but like she's got some acres.
Yeah.
She got some acres.
Yeah.
Acres of land. Beautiful trees and pecan plants and pear tree and all this stuff. It's great. What's the time? Oh yeah. So back on point. She likes to send letters, right? And we walk down to the place, the little one street strip. We go to the post office and we say, hey, we need to send this letter. We put a stamp on it, put the letter in, give it to the person, just send a letter. And it takes like 45 minutes. Like an hour. And now if I want to send a letter to someone, I write the letter and I email it to them. I get their Gmail. I say, all right, well, here's what I'm going to send you. It takes like 30 seconds to send it, and it's there to the other person. And it's crazy to think that when you give more people time to do other things, like be more creative people instead of just working, right? Or no, not necessarily working, but just spending more time on monotonous activities. Right? They have more time for innovation. They have more time for creativity. They have more time for making money. Like
and recreation, I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and this kind of this ties similarly, whatever that word is, right? You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I got you. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Whatever. This ties to that, to automation. Right? Because what automation is doing is it is getting rid of jobs, but it's also providing people with more time to do other things. Right? And who knows the actual benefits of people having more time to do other things, like be more creative or innovate other things.
And do what they actually like to do. You know what I mean? Like it gives people more time to have a meaningful and successful life. You know what I mean? Like if you work 14 hours a day, chances are that you don't have time to do things other than work, right? And through automation and through the advancement of civilization, you're able to provide those people with a more meaningful life because they do things outside of their work that they actually want to do, right? And this is, I don't necessarily want to bring it back to Marx, but he's, the one that said it very nicely, is that like, what is the purpose of, the advancement of our economy and the advancement of our society if people aren't given the time to do what they actually want to do? You know what I mean? Like if people nowadays work just as much as a French medieval peasant, right? What's the point of our advanced society, right? If you are doing just as much work, you don't have any time for leisure or recreation at all, then has all this development been for naught? Like, obviously there's more material wealth in the society and people are able to buy nice cars and own a lot of consumer goods, but at the end of the day, what makes people really happy is doing what they find meaningful in life, right? And when you have a job that cuts away at that, and in order to if the requirement to survive in society is putting aside all of your free time for work, chances are that people aren't going to be happy, right? So a significant part of improving people's quality of life is giving them more leisure time and more recreation time to do what they actually want to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's a lot of unforeseeable outcomes for providing people with more time to be creative and to have recreation or leisure.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
who knows? Maybe that person might invent something that'll be revolutionary.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Tying this all back to doctors. Well, let me just go back to another. I don't know if it's a criticism, but just a concern of mine with the Bernie Sanders campaign. In America, we have these bureaucracies like the DMV and the U.S. Postal Service, and they're terrible. They suck. They're the worst.
Yeah.
Anyone who's gone to the DMV knows that it's people in there hate their lives. They hate you, and it's hard to get your stuff. And it's tough to, like every time you go to the DMV, you missing a paper. You did something wrong or whatever. And when we make these big medical companies public, and we say that it's now run by the government, I immediately think, well, it's just going to turn into another DMV.
Yeah.
That I'm going to be sitting in the office for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours waiting with a ticket number to receive medical attention.
Yeah.
And, that's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing is, Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All proposal is not proposing to nationalize every aspect of healthcare, right? When you go to a private hospital, it's still going to be a private hospital. However, the only thing that changes is who pays for it, right? And instead of you, the individual, paying for it yourself, the government's going to pay for it, right? And so there's still going to be the competition and the incentive to streamline and economize and make things more efficient the way it is under the free market right now. However, one big change that it makes, and there's a lot of changes that it would make, right? But one big change is that it increases the bargaining power of the individual, right? Because right now, as one person receiving healthcare, you have almost zero bargaining power at all, right? If a pharma company demands $1,000 for your insulin, if you're diabetic, that's just what you have to pay, right? You have no real bargaining power at all. You can't say, well, I'm going to boycott you, right? Because that's the one provider of insulin.
You die.
They say, all right, go ahead, right? You don't get insulin and you die, right? And that happens at an alarming rate in this country right now. There's like I think it's something like I saw a stat like a third of diabetics skip insulin treatments because they can't afford it, right? Which is unbelievable, right? That this is something a person needs to live, and because the greed of a pharmaceutical company is allowed to be put above that person's health, people are genuinely suffering, right? And who benefits? An extremely small portion of stockholders that own that company, right? But back to the original point, being part of all of the U.S. as bargaining power, we are going to be able to drastically decrease the cost of healthcare, because now all of a sudden, if you're bargaining on behalf of the entire U.S. medical market, you can drastically reduce the costs of healthcare, right? Because, when instead of bargaining for one person, right, the official that's the representative of all those officials or all the healthcare receivers in this country, they now have a lot more bargaining power, because instead of cutting off, one individual person getting insulin, now all of a sudden you can restrict the market to everybody getting insulin unless the price gets dropped. you're able to drastically reduce that price, right?
Yeah, well, in every other country does that, right?
Yeah, pretty much every other developed country does that, right?
They say that you can only charge this price for insulin,
Yeah,
or you can only charge this price for this drug or whatever,
Yeah.
because if it's not regulated, then people seriously die because of as a result of that.
yeah,
And I don't know why that is. It's probably because there's probably not American, but political greed that is taking place between the pharmaceutical companies and also the lawmakers. Is that if you don't regulate our prices on our insulin or whatever medication it is,
EpiPen, whatever necessary drug is required for a person.
that's right.
Yeah.
Then, well, first off, you got to consider that these people, the pharmaceutical, the big pharma, right? If they get if there's a law that's passed that said you can only charge this price for insulin, then that is billions and billions of dollars of profit that's lost by the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
And so what they'll do is they'll use their money as a political investment for a continued non-regulated price of their drugs. And that's not desirable for the American people.
No, it's a subversion of our democracy, and it's it's not the way government should function, right? In my opinion, right? The interests of a few should not be able to override the interests of the many, right? Just because those few have significantly more money, right? And that's the sort of the vicious cycle that's been taking place in American politics ever since the founding of our country, right? Where very few people with a lot of money are able to influence the laws in their favor, and that results in them getting more money, and then they're able to buy more clout in Congress and more clout in our government, and they continue to use that power to gain more money, and it just becomes a vicious cycle of the wealthy class taking our government and our democracy and using it for their own favor, and it's resulted in the massive income disparity that we see in this country now. I mean, in the past 20, 30 years.
What do you mean by income disparity?
That certain people make billions of dollars every year doing no work at all, and the people that work hard every day, working their asses off, aren't even able to sustain a living wage, right? They can't support sending their kids to college. They, live paycheck to paycheck. They can't pay their rent sometimes, right? And the reason that we have that disparity is because we have an extremely porous government that allows, big money donations to influence our regulations and our politics. Yeah. In a lot of ways that subvert democracy and hurt the American people.
Yeah, well, I think that's a factor. I think there's a lot of reasons why there's a income disparity between in the United States. And is it true that having that massive income disparity is a bad thing?
I think that to this extent, yes. Right? I think that ultimately having some income disparity is natural, and it's when you look at it from a economic perspective, right? We have scarce goods, right? We don't have infinite goods. We don't have infinite resources. Yet we people have almost unlimited wants, right?
Yep.
Everything we get, we just want more, right?
Yep.
And so the way to reconcile those two factors is through a rationing system, right? Certain people can only get certain things, right? And not everybody can have what they want, right? And the best rationing system that we have at the moment is currency, right? That you have a certain amount of money to spend on certain things, and you decide where that money goes, right? And you can decide what the most effective use of your money is, and where to spend it, right? And that incentivizes, people to make more money, contribute to the economy more, in order to fulfill their wants, right?
That's right.
So at the end of the day, some income disparity incentivizes people to contribute to the economy, do more labor, and contribute to our society as a whole. Now, that being said, there are millions of people that contribute to our society without money, right? Without, the financial reward that comes with labor, thinking about the thousands of volunteers that, work at homeless shelters or, do community gardens or any of that sort of good thing.
Or your religious people who
anything like that, right? But at the end of the day, income disparity incentivizes people to work harder, which is a necessary factor in the modern economy, right?
Definitely, because then I can see
we have so many consumer goods is because people work really hard, right?
That's right.
And so when you remove that disparity, essentially, people lose the incentive to contribute, right?
So it's healthy to have this disparity.
some disparity,
Some.
right? They're somewhat of a curve, right? Now, does that curve, you know, have to be as drastic as the 3 richest people owning more wealth than the bottom 50% of people, right? I don't think so. I think that there can still be income disparity, right, while meeting the needs of the majority and curtailing the needs of the extremely wealthy few that have more money than they'll ever be able to spend in a lifetime, right?
Well, this is a complicated issue.
Yeah.
And I don't want to I don't want to simplify it too much.
Mm-hmm.
So repeat that statistic you just said. 3 people.
The 3 richest people in America have more wealth than the bottom 50% of people in America.
Okay. And so the first question you would have to ask yourself is, why do those 3 people have more wealth than the bottom 50%?
Mm-hmm. I would say it's because we have a system that allows money to make more money without limit, right? If you magically have $1 billion, that $1 billion can go out and work for you without you needing to do any work at all, right? If you invested in the stock market, chances are, coronavirus excluded, that money is going to make more money and you are going to be able to reap that benefit. And the thing is, all wealth is derived from labor. Can we agree on that as a premise? Right?
Yeah. Yep.
And if you're not laboring for your wealth, someone else is. So
if you're not laboring for your wealth, someone else is.
Right. So if you magically, I'll take myself as an example. Right. My family has family friends, right, who my parents helped them out financially when they were in a tough spot. They helped them pay their rent for a couple months, right? And a couple years later, they did extremely well financially, and they wanted to help my parents back, right? And so they opened up a savings account in my name and put $10,000 in it, right? And now that $10,000 has become $17,000. So let me ask you, where did that $17,000 come from?
The extra 7?
Yeah.
Or no, just the 17 in general.
No. The extra 7.
The
right?
extra 7.
That 10,000 came from our family friends,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I have not worked for $7,000 that's now in my name, right? Someone else did.
And what are you suggesting?
I'm suggesting that all wealth should be derived from labor, right? And currently we have a system that allows wealth to create more wealth without the input of labor at all.
Well, okay, but that's also very complicated because when you say labor, what comes to mind is this idea that there's some person in the field at a farm who's got the sickle in hand and is cutting down corn, and you gave the person the land, he's laboring, and somehow you're stealing the profits of this farmer. And I don't think that's what's happening. What I truly see happening is when people have an investment, when they have enough money to invest, they are choosing to, like you mentioned earlier, their resource of money. Money is seen as a resource because you buy resources with money. When you have people that have money, they use their money to sacrifice their resources in the present for more resources in the future. Okay? And so that sacrifice is their wealth that they get from that sacrifice is deserved. Because what you're trying, what I kind of sense in that argument is that you don't deserve that 7,000.
Yeah, I don't.
But okay, this is kind of a weird case with you because you got the $10,000 from your parents in the first case. So let's just assume that you got that $10,000 by working hard, and you decided to invest that money and you got $7,000 from it. You saying that you don't deserve the $7,000, I think, is not true in the case where you worked for it, because you decided that because our capitalist structure has promoted having wealth gives more wealth, it isn't intrinsically bad to make investments, right?
Yeah, I mean, investments are necessary for the growth of the economy. However,
And when you assume that the investments that you're making is only the only person who's actually helping your investments is some poor laborer who is slaving away at the job, I don't think it's a very accurate representation of what's actually truly happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the American system, well, the American stock is structured, is that the labor of people contribute to a growing financial improvement of the country itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I sense this weird assumption in the argument that somehow making an investment is tyranny over the labor. And I don't think that's true.
You got it. You said it right. Yeah. I mean, how do you explain the wealth disparity in America then? Because do you think that Jeff Bezos has done almost $1 trillion worth of labor, right, in his lifetime?
Well, there's not a direct correlation between. Okay, so we agreed on the premise that labor creates wealth.
Yes.
Right? And so if we agree on that premise, then we could say that the more a person labors, the more wealth they have.
Yeah.
See, I don't. That would be
directly through income, right? So if you're laboring for your wealth, you're getting paid directly for the work you do. However, if you're not working and you're making paychecks, you're not working for that money, right? So when you receive dividends for the stocks that you own, right, other people are working for that, right? And that money is being given to you purely on the fact that you have money and they don't.
Yeah. So
it creates a vicious cycle of the more money that you have, the more money you're able to make. And as that amount of money increases, from $1 million to $1 billion, you're able to gain significantly more ROI, right? When you make $1 billion investment, you're going to make a lot more money than $1 million investment or $1,000 investment.
Sure.
So as you go up the income curve and the wealth curve,
it exponentially increases.
It increases exponentially, right? So the people at the very top are able to rake in significantly more money
because they have more money
as investors, right?
Yeah.
So
that's the economic structure of the United States.
Yeah.
Right. So here's something to consider, right? That people get paid according to the skill of their labor. Right? A doctor makes more money than a sanitation worker, the trash man.
Yeah.
Right? They make more money than a trash man because their labor is more skilled.
Uh-huh.
They have to have more knowledge for their labor.
Yeah.
And so what determines why a person gets paid more?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's the market itself.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we consider Jeff Bezos, what his skill is providing something extraordinarily useful to the market of people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so his pay is determined based on the market's needs. Or not needs, but wants, rather.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the market's wants.
Mm-hmm.
And so to say that I don't think it's an accurate connection to say that Jeff Bezos makes the amount of money he makes because of all his other laborers, that the only reason he's super wealthy is because he somehow is standing on the heads of his laborers. Ultimately, what I believe is that he provided something adequate that was desirable for the consumers of America.
Mm-hmm.
And the skill of his labor was so great that he made so much money because of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you get what I'm trying to say? I don't think you're
Yeah.
taking into consideration people get paid differently based on their occupation because of the skill that's required in their occupation.
Definitely. I mean, the thing is, it's extremely hard to price managerial labor, right? When you can price industrial labor very easily, right? One person cranks out X units of this consumer good, and therefore we know exactly how much hiring them will increase our productivity, how much good the company will gain from hiring them, and therefore we can pay them accordingly, right? Based on the labor market, and we're going to end up paying them as low as possible because that's the incentive that capitalism provides, right? Because we want to make as much profit as possible, so we're going to get someone that's willing to fill that position by paying them as low as possible. However, when you look at the market for managerial labor, it's extremely skewed, right? Because if at the end of the day, if you look at who makes the decisions on how much everybody gets paid in the company, it's the board of directors, right? who are managers.
Okay.
Right? And because all the managers in America, all the board of directors have an incentive to pay themselves as much as possible, the market for managerial labor has become inflated, basically, because, all the other companies pay their CEOs, Fortune 500 companies pay their CEOs millions and millions of dollars. Then the only way we're going to get one of those CEOs is by also paying them millions and millions of dollars. So do you see how it's kind of a vicious cycle that as other board of directors boost their wages up because they have the incentive to pay themselves as much as possible, other companies have to follow suit because in order to get a talented CEO, they have to match the market price of managerial labor.
So it's being conflated.
It's being artificially inflated, right?
Yeah.
If an AI were to decide how much labor a manager or a CEO or CFO, anything like that, puts into the company, they would probably pay them less than they're being paid right now. However, because we have an established system where CEOs and other high-level managers get paid an extremely high amount, the only way to get another CEO, a talented CEO, is by paying them an extremely high amount, right?
Okay.
Now, back to the question of Jeff Bezos, right? So, the obvious reason why he has so much money is because he was the founder of Amazon, right? And because he created or helped create an institution that provides a service that a lot of Americans use, right? Now, I think that to say that it was Jeff Bezos that built this institution up from the ground is ignoring a lot of factors, right? First of all, the reason he was put in as founder and CEO is because his parents gave him a $300,000 loan at the start of the company, right? So
I don't see how that's relevant.
Okay, so let's compare Jeff Bezos and, Jeff Ackerman, right? I made up that name, but they are equally as skilled, right? Equally as talented as managers, and they have the same idea for Amazon, right? They're going to create an online...
and one has the resources and the other doesn't have the resources.
Exactly.
See, but here's the thing. If you're trying to say that we should wipe away the I don't think it's very valid to say that because Jeff Bezos had the resources to create Amazon. That's why Amazon's a massive enterprise now.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that we should to make the argument that Jeff Bezos is only Jeff Bezos because he started out wealthy, therefore he's somewhat tyrannical, is not valid at all. Because what are you going to do? Are you going to wipe away the resources? Are you going to say that anyone who gets enough capital to start a business and who have the same idea of another person who doesn't have the capital, therefore we should try and completely level all the resources equally to everyone so that it can be equally creative? I don't think that's a very good argument.
No, I just think that we can restructure our institutions to make them more meritocratic, I think that having independent entrepreneurs is not a necessity for entrepreneurship, right? I think that we can have institutions that provide the initial startup capital for a company, right? And get that money paid back through interest on
We already have that.
How?
With banks.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that instead of having it be independent and private, we should have entrepreneurial institutions that get the most meritocratic, most talented, most hardworking entrepreneur and give them that position of power, regardless of their familial wealth. Right?
Well, that would be not desirable because there'd be a substantial amount of people who are unqualified for the position itself. Like the reason why you have to go to a bank to get the capital, and the reason why they give you the capital is because they have trust in you that you'll return with interest.
Yeah.
Right. And making making a system where anyone can go who has their own idea that could be completely not wanted by the market itself doesn't seem desirable, because then the interest wouldn't be paid back.
Yeah, I'm not proposing that every single fucker with an idea, I'm gonna start a soda company that makes pickle flavored soda. That's be dope, dude.
Yeah,
like I'm not. That's not.
No,
what I'm proposing.
I'm not saying you're saying that.
But by having a range of these entrepreneurial institutions that engage in the market, they will have the incentive to pick and choose the best companies, right? I mean, think about it as Shark Tank, right? Great show, right? Not that great.
Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban, our boy, right? They have the incentive to pick the companies that they feel are going to be the most successful, right? By evaluating them based on their own metrics, right? So these this myriad of independent entrepreneurial institutions would be doing the same thing, right? They have an incentive to pick the best business and give them the initial startup loan, right? And I think that would greatly broaden the range of entrepreneurs in this country, right? Because right now, under the current system, the only way you're going to be an entrepreneur is if you have established wealth, right? Now, even if not
necessarily,
no.
right?
Let me do it out, right? So there's one route where you have enough wealth, like Jeff Bezos, that your parents can just give you a $300,000 loan and it's no big deal, right? And you're able to start that company using your own financial capital, and get that company off of the ground and making profit relatively quickly, right? And then the other option is that you have to look to an outside source for capital, right? You have to go to a bank and get a bank loan, or you have to go to a venture capital firm and convince them to give you an investment in your company. However, when you're during that period where you're founding that company and you're using all of that money to, get this company off of the ground, you need to be able to support yourself somehow, right? You need to be able to pay for your rent, pay for your mortgage, pay for your food, support your family, all that good stuff. And unless you have a significant amount of money saved up, then you don't have the opportunity to do that, right? I mean, right now, if a Sprouts cashier, let's say, has, a couple $100s in savings because they live paycheck to paycheck in this extremely expensive city, they don't have that opportunity to take that entrepreneurial idea and do entrepreneurial labor to get that company off the ground without being paid, right?
Yeah, well, to an extent, because you can still get a loan, right, from banks and all that.
Potentially, right? But you need to be able to do a lot of labor, unpaid labor, for a significant amount of time before you can start getting paid. Right?
Before you can monetize.
Before you can monetize it. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so by broadening the metrics that allow an entrepreneur to found a company and enter the market, you allow for a much more meritocratic entrepreneurial market, right?
Sure.
So if these entrepreneurial institutions, they would develop their own metrics, right? Develop their own qualifying systems, right? If someone has a dumb idea, they're probably not going to give them that loan. However, if someone has a good idea, right, that they think will fill a niche in the market and end up becoming successful, they can pay that entrepreneur, put them under their employ, and found up that company and pay that entrepreneur back in interest on that loan, right?
So,
and then that company doesn't have to be under the tyranny of its founder. It can be owned by its workers, and that's a model for entrepreneurship in a socialist economy. Where that entrepreneur, just because they founded that company, does not necessarily get control over the entire company once it's burgeoned to its established state. That entrepreneur still gets rewarded for their labor, and they can either move on to the next company. They might be a serial entrepreneur like Mark Cuban, go on and found the next company, continue making interest off the initial loan that founded that original company, and just keep making new companies, going all over the place, filling all these niches in the market. Or they can continue to work for that company. They might get a managerial position, and they'll be paid accordingly, So
I see that.
It basically provides a route for people that don't have money right now to become entrepreneurs without the currently necessary amount of wealth that it takes to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I just I don't understand in your argument that we don't already have this system in place, right? Because it seems like aside from the workers having more power part of that, but that we don't have institutions that provide capital for people who want to become entrepreneurs and provide something useful to the market.
Yeah.
Because it seems like already we have these banks who can provide capital for these people. Granted that you do have to be, stable in your rent. You got to have good credit. You got to actually have a good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And when you mentioned earlier that broadening the stipulations for receiving that loan, not stipulations, but broadening the qualifications you need for that loan.
Not necessarily broadening the qualifications, but just broadening the amount of people that have that opportunity, right? I mean, if you work a low-income job, right, you make $8 an hour, you live in rural Mississippi, right, chances are that you don't have months to put aside to develop an idea, flesh it out, and then present it to an investor, because those, before even approaching the investor, you need to input entrepreneurial labor. And if people are spending all of their labor making income because they need to, because they don't have a lot of money saved up, then it restricts a significant amount of the population from entering the entrepreneurial market, right?
It does.
Yeah.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah. So I think, if you look at entrepreneurs right now, they're almost all relatively wealthy people, right? And all, you do have stories of, your Warren Buffetts who started in a middle class family, right? And, owned a bunch of gumball machines, and, that was the startup capital that they used to start their further companies. But if you look at it as a whole, almost all entrepreneurs come from wealthy families, because starting a company and becoming an entrepreneur is an inherently risky choice in life. And when you come from money and stability, you have a tendency to make riskier decisions, because you don't feel like making that risky decision could put your life in jeopardy, right? You always
Definitely.
know
But
that you can go back to your family.
That's
right?
part and parcel of being an entrepreneur in the first place, is taking the risk.
Mhm.
But let me offer.
But the cushion of wealth allows you to take that risk.
That's right. That's right.
And so it restricts the entry requirements to wealthy people exclusively, almost. Now you have cases, 1 in a million, right, of poor people that end up becoming entrepreneurs. However, if we want the entrepreneurial market to be meritocratic and have the best, most talented people with the best ideas to go out and found companies, we need to broaden the range of people that are allowed to become entrepreneurs to the entire population.
Okay, so what I'm getting is this, that in order to make money, you need to have money already. That's kind of the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are given the capital to start these businesses are somewhat ahead of the race in making the capital.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow that's unfair.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's kind of what I'm getting, is that somehow that's unfair. And that's where I don't understand that perspective, because even if it is unfair, how are you going to regulate it? Because it would be necessary for somewhat of a government intervention saying you can't give your kid Jeff Bezos $300,000,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't sound practical at all, and it doesn't seem like it could ever actually work.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily advocating for the banishment of wealthy people from the entrepreneurial market, right? I think that they're always going to become entrepreneurs, right? But I think that if they are forced to compete on a level playing field with all of the talented potential entrepreneurs in America right now, that chances are they're going to find it a lot tougher, right? Now, I'm sure there are plenty of wealthy people that have great educations and great ideas that would still end up becoming successful entrepreneurs. But I just think that leveling the playing field would result in a better system, because we would have a greater proportion of the population able to compete in this entrepreneurial marketplace. And whenever you have more competition, it results in better results for the end consumer, and you will have better ideas end up going in. There are so many wealthy entrepreneurs that end up making bad companies. I mean, WeWork is a good example of that, right? It was a company that's now gone bankrupt that wanted to create communal offices, right? That we're gonna have an office in every city, and it's gonna be super cool. Yoga balls, and you can get free coffee, and it's gonna be kind of a club vibe, but also get your work done there. And we're gonna basically receive rent from companies that want to allow their workers to work in our communal office spaces, right? And they spent something on the range of $1 billion buying real estate all over this country. Buying extremely valuable offices, right? And they got that startup capital because the founders were incredibly wealthy and they had good connections, and they were able to rake in a lot of money from their family connections and the investors that were willing to give them money, right? And it ended up becoming a spectacular failure. It's gone bankrupt. They've had to sell all their properties, and it ended up doing very very badly, right? So there are plenty of wealthy entrepreneurs that come up with bad ideas. And I think that if we force entrepreneurs to compete on a truly level playing field, we're going to get rid of some of those bad ideas, right? We're going to end those $1 billion investments that go down the toilet by basically making it a more equitable meritocratic system that promotes true entrepreneurship, not true entrepreneurship, but better entrepreneurship, just by broadening the amount of people that are able to compete in that marketplace. You know, like if you restrict, I don't know, another industry or another market, right? Like let's say only these families can, I don't know, sell hardware, right? As opposed to everybody, right? Chances are that the hardware market is going to suffer, right?
Yeah, because there's no competition.
There's
in the
no
market.
competition, right?
Sure, yeah, and I get that.
And chances are, you're not going to have the most, you might have a talented hardware salesman every once in a while in coming from one of those families. However, they're not going to be as talented as the meritocratic system that brings up all the best hardware salesmen from the whole population, So by broadening the amount of people that are allowed to enter that market, you're going to have a better system. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I don't know. There's just a lot of confusing things in there, and I don't know. It doesn't seem very specific to any one market, because what the proposal is, what an intrinsic problem is in that proposal is the idea that anyone can provide something useful to a market whenever. And that's not necessarily true. Only people that know what the market wants can provide something useful to the market.
Yeah.
And when you say that we need to broaden the amount of people that can enter into that market, which isn't bad at all, you're saying we'll level the playing field by saying that everyone can receive this capital to start their own business, and that is
So let me
yeah.
I'll
go ahead.
clarify
Go
a little bit,
ahead.
right? So I'm not saying,
Because I'm still a little bit confused on this.
So I'm not saying that anybody that goes into the office just gets a check, right? These are going to be independent institutions, right? Let's say there's 100 of them, right? Some of them locally based, right? This is a San Diego entrepreneurial trust, right? Or a national trust, right? But they still have the private incentive to make the best choices, right? And they're going to have their own qualification process that says, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, right? And so some, high-ass stoner comes in like, hey, man, we're going to make bongs out of fucking steel, dude. Like,
yeah,
it might be a good idea. I don't know, right? But
Yeah.
chances are they're not going to meet the qualifications, and they're not going to be judged on the metrics correctly, or they're going to fail the tests, whatever that institution has chosen to put in place, and they're not going to receive that loan. These independent entrepreneurial institutions still have the private incentive to make the best choices as they can, and they're going to have different metrics, different qualifications. Some might focus on a particular industry, some might focus on a particular area. But at the end of the day, if they choose to make a bunch of bad investments, they're going to go under. They're going to go bankrupt, just like any other company in the market.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily allowing everybody to receive the capital required to make a company, but just broadening the requirements to be in the
Definitely.
race.
So what I'm getting is people who are qualified not qualified, but people who have a good idea for a product that an investor sees as useful will receive a loan to provide the capital for that company, right? And that would promote competition, because the Jeff Bezos, who was given $300,000 to start his business, now the other guy that you mentioned can get that $300,000 to compete with Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, exactly, and potentially make
and I think that's ultimately desirable.
Yeah,
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Going back to our original talk about the wealth disparity, income disparity between Americans. When you have here, let me just summarize my perspective on this. What I see is people looking at the results of these massive, these big billionaires. They say, "Wow, Bill Gates, he's got tons of money, and it's crazy. And isn't he a lucky guy?" Right? And when I hear that, I think, well, no one just luckily makes $1 billion unless you win whatever, the Powerball or whatever. It's through tons of hard work, a lot of painstaking hours, right? the reason why Bill Gates is because he had the foresight to see computers are the future,
Mm-hmm.
and he would go down to his library
Mm-hmm.
and spend thousands and thousands of hours in coding,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the reason why he got to that position, because he saw that there was a massive revolution coming with technology,
Mm-hmm.
and he rode that wave.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But so that's that first generation of wealth, right? The people that went from being upper class to the uber wealthy, right? Bill Gates was not a poor man before he became.
Well, let me just
No,
continue.
no, no, no. But so let's look at the second and third generations, right? Let's take the Walton family for example, right? So the founder of Walmart started in Kansas City, right? And it was like James Walton or whatever, John Walton, something like that, right? He monopolized, right? He moved up the supply chain. He, tried to create a monopoly horizontally and vertically, right? Good financial decisions. It ended up, shutting out a lot of workers and a lot of suppliers. However, he developed a successful company that provides incredibly cheap consumer goods to a lot of America. Now, the Walton family now are like 3 generations removed from him, right? And almost none of them have positions in the Walmart Corporation, right? None of them work, or a couple of them do, right? A couple of the grandsons, right? But a majority of the Walton family is outside of Walmart. They don't contribute anything, yet they're able to be billionaires, right? They're the wealthiest family. When you put all of their net worth together, they are the wealthiest family in America, right?
Yeah.
Now, do they deserve that wealth? Let me
Well,
ask you.
okay, but this is, I knew you were going to say that, but
Yeah.
this is complicated because first off, if you're promoting entrepreneurship, which you are, then there's going to be people who are the Michael Jordans of entrepreneurs, right? The people who are just slam dunking over all these plebs,
Yeah.
right? And so when you have those people, they generate tons of wealth,
Yeah.
right? And that wealth stays in the family.
Should it though?
Well, of course it should, because
if they didn't labor for that wealth, it's a whole discussion of whether these first generation billionaires did really labor for all that wealth, and we went over that pretty well. But I could talk about it more. But I think now the question is of if your great grandpappy, owns Standard Oil, right, and you're a Rockefeller, and you just inherited $1 billion, do you deserve that wealth?
I don't think that's a very good question, because I don't think that's the proper question to be asking. I think the question to be asking is, how can we promote more of these families? How can we promote more entrepreneurs to create more wealth? I don't think it's necessarily important to ask, do the people who inherited this wealth deserve that wealth? Because what you're assuming is that after the person dies, we should take all the money from the person who actually deserved that wealth.
Well, so who deserves? Okay, so one.
I keep using the word deserves.
Yeah,
I don't think deserves is the proper word, because we already established that skilled labor promotes more wealth.
Right. So if you don't have skilled labor, right, and you don't contribute anything to the economy labor-wise, why do you have $1 billion? Well, shouldn't other people that actually contribute to the economy have that wealth instead? I mean, like hypothetically, right? A Walton member, right now, Walton family member can literally just sit in their house all day and just watch TV, and they will make more money in that day than some people do in their entire lifetimes of slaving their ass off at a 9 to 5 and contributing to the economy, right?
And you see that as unfair.
Yeah.
And they didn't deserve any of it, and why the hell do they have all that money?
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, obviously I know why, right? Because they inherited it, right? But I think that if we believe that all wealth is derived from labor and that all the wealth should come from labor, then we should curtail people making extreme amounts of wealth and contributing no labor.
Yeah. Okay. So my question for that would be: so why do you think they shouldn't have that money? Which is they didn't deserve it. And what are you going to do about it? Are we going to start stealing their money? Are we going to tax, third generation families to death? Are we just going to take all their money?
Yeah.
Right. So
there's a thing called,
if that's the idea.
Yeah, there's a thing called the estate tax. right? So if you inherit over, I think it's something like $5 million, you get taxed on that, right? And Trump actually got rid of that, right, as an executive order in his administration, right? And because we established before that money creates more money, and the more money you have, the amount of money you can make increases exponentially. If you inherit $1 billion, you are essentially set for life. You don't have to do anything. That money is going to work on its own. It's going to make investment. You just put it in the hands of a banker, and that banker can use it to make more money, right? And you're not contributing anything to the economy, right? So I think that these people, if you want to be that wealthy, right, you have to contribute to the economy, right, through labor. Maybe it's entrepreneurial labor, maybe it's just regular labor working in a job, but in order to have that wealth, you have to have an extremely skilled labor, right? Michael Jordan, he's an incredibly good basketball player, right? He fucking kicked ass and he dunked on everybody, right? Like you're saying, fuck those plebs, right?
Yeah.
And so his labor was extremely skilled, right?
Which is why it was valued.
Which is why it's extremely valued. And through that labor, he was able to make a lot of money, right? Now, Walton grandchild, do they have incredibly skilled labor? Maybe. I don't know. But the chances are they don't have the amount of skill and the amount of, hard work necessary to make $1 billion worth of wealth,
I get your point,
yeah.
but there's just a lot of assumptions
like
in your
what?
point.
Like what?
Well, one assumption is that since the founder of we're at like 2 hours something right now.
It's only 11.
You gotta leave at 12:15?
Yeah, 12:15.
All right.
Yeah.
So the first assumption in that point I would say is that because the first assumption I would say is when you have people who make an extremely profitable product, right, or company, right, that the first generation deserved it because Walton had an extraordinarily skilled idea.
Right. That's a premise of this argument.
Yep.
Right. And
That
that's a whole other argument.
Sure.
Right?
That whether or not they deserve it.
Right. And
right.
we talked about that briefly. Right.
We
but
did.
let's assume that the first generation earns that wealth.
Exactly.
Right. Rockefeller is a good businessman, right?
Yep.
He, created a massive monopoly over one of the biggest industries in the world, and was able to, through a lot of backstabbing.
Well, let's not talk about Rockefeller because we're past this time.
Yeah.
Let's talk about I don't know, Jeff Bezos or something.
Yeah.
But aside from that, right? The assumption that the third generation didn't deserve it. What is the product of that idea is that once the founder of that company dies, then all the wealth that he has created in the company that he's created ultimately should go back to the people
that created it. All the
back to the laborers. Is that what you're saying?
All the drivers, all the cashiers, all the shelf stockers that made that money in the first place.
Okay, then the money that you give to them,
Maybe
they deserve that money?
Yeah, because they worked for it.
I don't think. Okay,
I mean,
here's the thing: it's not valued.
I'm not necessarily proposing
Sure.
that we should only take that money from the estate tax and give it back to the workers for that company. I think that money should be used in a utilitarian way, right? That money can be used to drastically increase the standard of living for a lot of people, and by leaving it in the hands of a few, right, it's going to be used to, the thing is, as your wealth increases exponentially, your material standard of living can only increase so much, right? When you give a person that has no money at all $1,000 a month, right? That standard of living goes from being on the streets, getting food out of dumpsters, to having a house and, being able to buy groceries, right? But if you increase the wealth of a billionaire, a Walton member, right, $1,000 a month, it's not going to impact their quality of life at all. They're going to continue to live in their mansion. They're going to continue to go on vacations to the Bahamas. They're going to ride jet skis or whatever they do with their wealth, right? They might be frugal and just spend it like a regular person, right? But the thing is, if we want to use that money to increase the standard of living and use it in a utilitarian way, it can be spent in better places than by that person that didn't earn that wealth.
Okay, so one criticism of that would be what happens to the company after the money that was given to the, we'll say, grandchildren of Walton.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you take the money that their grandfather made that established this company that was given to them, right? What happens to the capital that is continuing the company?
What do you mean?
Well, in order to have a company continue, it
Yeah.
needs to be constantly making capital and reinvesting the capital into
Yeah.
the company.
Yeah.
So what happens when you remove the CEO of the company
Yeah.
and his wealth that he generates from the laborers,
Mhm.
right? What happens to the money when it doesn't get reinvested into the company?
Yeah. So I'm not advocating for stripping companies themselves of the savings that they've established, right? When money goes from the Walton or the Walmart Corporation into the pockets of the Walton family, that money leaves that pool of investment, right? In order for the Walton family to have that much money, they're making dividends from the stocks, and they are using those dividends to invest in other stocks and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So I'm not necessarily advocating for the stripping of all wealth in any place at all, right?
Well, no, not totally.
Yeah, right.
For sure.
However, the individuals that have that money are they might invest it back into the company, right? And get paid accordingly, right? They buy more stock, right? And that puts money into the company, and they receive dividends on that stock, and they stock price goes up, their net worth goes up, right? All that good stuff. However, I think that redistributing that money in an equitable way, right? At the end of the day, that money is going back into the economy, right? Or it's going into a savings account, right? Where those savings are invested further, right? So at the end of the day, the money is still in the, there's the same amount of money in the economy, right? In this hypothetical scenario. But the thing is, that money is used in a more utilitarian way, where it is used to increase the lives, or increase the standard of living of those that have incredibly low standards of living, where it is currently used to not increase the standard of living, but just increase the total amount of wealth that incredibly wealthy people have.
Okay. Well, let me offer a perspective.
Yeah.
So one reason why people decide to create businesses is because they want a better life for their children, right? I'd say that's a major purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're promoting when a person dies that the money that they are somehow hoarding, right, should be given to the laborers, wouldn't that wipe away the incentive of the entrepreneurs to provide a better life for their children?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it would.
Yeah.
It would. Because then no money that I make in my life, all the money that I make in my life has to be spent before I die. And if it isn't spent before I die, then it's going to be stolen away from me.
Yeah.
Maybe stolen is not the right word. Sorry.
Yeah, it's got a negative connotation.
Sorry.
Right?
I shouldn't say stolen, but
taxed.
We'll just say redistributed.
Yeah, redistributed, right? Yeah, and I think that the desire to give your children enough money that they don't have to work ever is not necessarily a good thing, right? I think that everybody should have to contribute to the economy, right? And everybody needs to labor for their wealth, right? And that by promising your children a life of no labor at all, where other people have to work their ass off for close to nothing, right? Living in poverty, it provides a bad setup for those children, right? If you want your children to be hardworking and talented and have good morals, right? Giving them the cushion that they never have to work ever is not necessarily setting up your children for a good life, right? Materially maybe, right? But I think that doing something meaningful with your life is a necessary facet of having a good, meaningful life. And in order to do that in a lot of ways, you need to do something for other people, right? And that means contributing to the economy, right?
Let me clarify my position real quick, because I'm not advocating that people who make tons of money should when they die, give all their money to their children so that they don't have to work a day in their life. I don't think that's very good. In fact, Warren Buffett, who is one of the richest men in the world, right, is not giving his kids his money.
Yeah, which I think is admirable.
I think is very admirable.
Right, and I think that that's the model that people should follow. And instead of having to ask billionaires to voluntarily do that,
it should be forced.
It should be institutionalized,
Well, yeah, okay. Eric, I completely see your perspective.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right?
I just, I look around America and I see such incredible disparity, right? People are able to hoard enough money, more money than they'll ever be able to spend in a lifetime, and more money than their children and their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren will ever be able to spend in a lifetime, realistically, right? And at the same time, we have people that work every day, contributing to our country, doing necessary labor, people working as janitors, people working as cashiers, doing necessary things that benefit the rest of us, and they aren't even able to scrape by. They go bankrupt because they get stricken with some health problem and they get hit with a $40,000 bill, right? Or they're not able to send their kids to college because college is so incredibly expensive, right? And I morally have to I can't justify a system that allows those two things to simultaneously exist. Right now, if everybody was provided for and nobody was suffering in this country unjustly, then sure, let the billionaires have all their billions, right? But because we have a system that causes so much pain and so much suffering, I have to come up with something in my mind, that an alternative that rectifies those two separate worlds. You know what I mean? Like I can't sit idly by and watch people suffer unjustly because of the family that they were born into or because of the color of their skin, while other people are able to have so much money that it's not benefiting anybody but themselves. I think that in this case we should take a utilitarian approach, and like I said before, there needs to be some hierarchy of wealth to encourage people to contribute to the economy.
Definitely.
And ration our scarce goods accordingly. But I think that hierarchy of wealth doesn't have to be so drastic that, like I said before, people are suffering and people are dying because of their income, and other people are so incredibly wealthy that they're able to send rockets to the moon just because they want to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a very good summary.
Yeah.
Let me provide my summary real quick. When we talk about wealth inequality in America, we have to ask why it's happening. And one of the major reasons why it's happening is because America is set up that way. We're set up in a way that more money makes more money, right? Is that necessarily bad? No. It's not necessarily bad. It's actually beneficial in many cases as well.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think there could be a society in America, a system in place that the poor don't have to be unbearably poor, and the rich don't have to be unbearably rich, right? And I think that people could be treated more fairly within their lives, right? And it does seem unfair that Bill Gates has so much money and the homeless man on the street has no money, and that if Bill Gates spent a fraction of a percentage of his wealth, he could drastically change that homeless person's life. And I think there's a cap to how much satisfaction a person can get from their wealth, and they've reached that satisfaction limit at like $1 million.
Yeah.
And since the fact that they have billions and billions of dollars, it isn't satisfying their wants anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And the desires and the needs of the people that are poor are greater than one person's total satisfaction of their life. Right.
Yeah.
So that is my first point. Second point is that hierarchies and your Michael Jordans, who are just the best basketball players, will always exist. Right. And to say that they somehow unfairly, the fact that they got to that position doesn't mean that they were unfair in their way of getting there. I think somewhat implicitly implied when people are talking about the 1%ers is how they don't deserve it, and that it was that they somehow got to that position by standing on the heads of all their laborers. I don't think that's very I don't think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
So that number two, I think the people who have all this money and wealth had an idea that was extremely profitable, and to say that it's undeserved is a disservice to the billionaires.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And my last point would be that in order to have a society where the poor aren't extraordinarily poor, there needs to be taxes for the extraordinarily wealthy, so that the burden of the taxes doesn't fall on the middle class, and the middle class can continue its consumerism that it will always have,
Mm-hmm.
and the upper class can continue having its massive tons of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, when you're at 12 billion, what's the difference between 12 billion and 62 billion?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
whatever the
Materially,
difference.
it's
materially,
not much.
it's not much.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I do believe that cutting taxes on the rich is a very short-term gain, that benefits the economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
With voodoo economics and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that there could be a time when that inequality is somewhat shortened between the two people.
Mm-hmm.
It would really depend on the means.
Mm-hmm.
It would really depend on the actions of how it was done. But
Yeah.
I think a very practical step is increasing taxes on the rich.
Yeah. I
Right.
mean, let me pose you a question here. So do you think that there should be a wealth tax, right? Because right now, only income is taxed, right? So your capital gains are taxed at a pretty low rate, and then you're taxed on your income that you're paid. However, the amount of money that you have just in your bank account is not taxed. So do you think that we should be taxing wealth essentially?
Well, I don't want to sidestep the question because it's a good question. But
Yeah.
let me just bring this up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want a system. Well, not a system. I don't want people to believe that the rich somehow stole money from the people who don't have money.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you have that idea, it deteriorates into class warfare.
Yeah.
Can we agree?
Yeah, which is not necessarily a bad thing in my opinion. I think that
Well, class warfare, in my opinion,
I think that
is not
it's
beneficial for the society as a whole.
the rich wage class warfare every day, right? When a government is cutting Social Security, Medicare, and child services, right? The Meals on Wheels program, right, was cut under the Trump administration, which is a program that provides meals for elderly people that aren't able to provide them for themselves. It gives them companionship. They're able to see someone and talk to someone for maybe the only time that they are able to, and that program was cut in order to give taxes to the wealthy.
Okay, and on the
And
same
that's class warfare, man.
sure,
Like,
and on the opposite end,
yeah.
right? And on the opposite end, in Stalin's Russia and,
Mhm.
and Mao Zedong's China,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
When there was this class struggle between the wealthy and the oppressed,
Mm-hmm.
right? That deteriorated into a power game,
Mm-hmm.
where if anyone had more power over the other person, then they should be shot and killed,
Mhm.
right? So there isn't an extreme pole
Mm-hmm.
that is perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But I think that our current system allows the rich to wage class warfare, right? As much as they want, essentially. I mean, they buy politicians and they buy tax cuts and loopholes for themselves, but there's no reciprocity, right? The poor have no means of waging war back, right? It's a one-sided fight, right? And there's no electoral option that allows, other than a vote for Bernie Sanders right now, there's been no electoral option for the poor to wage that warfare, and by eliminating that option, right, and you're by having a government that allows a one-sided war to continue, is spiraling us down into real violent class warfare, right? If you continue to allow the rich to take from the poor legislatively, right, and continue to take and continue to take and continue to take and hoard their wealth, right, eventually the poor are going to rise up, like in Mao's China or Stalin's Russia, right, and kill the rich, right? So if you want to avoid that situation, you need to allow that process to happen peacefully and legislatively. You know what I mean?
Well, okay, but that's debatable, Eric.
Yeah, debate me.
Well, because you're saying things are deteriorating for the poor, and I don't think they are.
Real wages, when adjusted for inflation,
I heard you bring up the statistic earlier in another
haven't
podcast.
risen since 1970.
But the question is whether or not the satisfaction of the people is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the materials that they have are better than they previously had in the 70s, right? And so it isn't a matter of real wages. It's a matter of materials, right? And so the materials that they have been growing, although the wages have been the same. So because as we earlier mentioned, that capital, that the capital you have determines how much resources you can have, okay? The materials have exponentially gone up. Well, maybe not exponentially, but they've gone up.
Well, no, I mean, let's look at the biggest costs, right, that a person incurs, providing for themselves, right? Rent, the cost of food, the cost of living as a whole, right? The cost of living has increased beyond wages, right? Rent has gone up more than wages have gone up, right? The cost of living has increased more than the average worker is paid, right? The cost of healthcare has gone up tenfold, right? While wages have remained the same, right? Now, there are lots of consumer goods that have reduced in price, right? People can buy big TVs now. People can buy, tons of McDonald's little toys, right? You get Happy Meals for pretty cheap, right? And so, the cheap material goods, and a lot of that's due to globalization and the access to cheap labor in overseas markets, right?
Increased manufacturing or whatever.
Yeah, and so that has gone up in a way, right? But overall, the necessities for a person's life, right? Healthcare, rent, those sort of things, have become more expensive, while the amount of money that the average person has to pay for those has not gone up. Right.
Yeah.
So that squeezes out the amount of money that you have to pay for recreational goods.
Well, I don't know if it actually does squeeze out the ability to buy more material goods. I mean, because it would be dependent on how much the material goods has decreased, right? Because if the material goods has decreased more than the rents and your basic necessities has increased, that would still mean that the income stagnating wouldn't matter, because the materials are still provided.
Yeah.
So it would you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It would be depending on how much the material goods have
and
decreased.
we don't really have any statistics to back up either side, right?
No, we don't.
But let me pose it in a different way, right? Productivity has increased steadily since the 1970s, right? A worker gets more and more productive every year because of automation, right? You're able to do the same amount with the same amount of labor, or no, you're able to do more with the same amount of labor in the same amount of time.
Sure.
Right?
Or even less labor.
Even less labor, right? One McDonald's worker can make 4 burgers when before they could only make 1, you know what I mean?
Yep.
But they're being paid the same amount, right?
So productivity has increased while labor has stayed the same.
Wages have stayed the same,
Wages
right?
have stayed the same. Yep.
So where has that wealth gone, right? Because the workers are more productive, right? But they're not getting that labor. Or they're not being paid more for that labor. So where
it's going. Well, I know exactly where it's going to.
It's to the top.
Sure.
To the people that own the companies. Right?
Yep. Okay.
To the people that make capital investments.
Which
and able to reap those benefits.
And the automation has promoted cheaper goods, right? Because the cost of labor isn't so high.
Yeah.
Right. And so it doesn't necessarily matter the wages of the person, because the materials surrounding them, because of automation, have become cheaper. Right. And so I don't think the statistic is very useful, because although on paper it would seem that because they have less income,
Mm-hmm.
they have less materials. It isn't true, because the materials around them have gotten cheaper, and so the income that they're receiving is now allowing for them to buy more materials.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean,
And there's a valid argument to be made. And we don't have statistics, right?
I don't have stats. I don't know how much, to me, it seems like the material cost of living has gone up, right? There are cheap goods that, fill particular niches in your life that, have gone down in price, right? But the biggest costs in your life, right? Healthcare and rent, and childcare and, education have gone up significantly, right?
Sure.
And I don't know, to me, like, we have a legislative system that has promoted keeping the minimum wage low, continuing to push down wages, right, or keep them at a low level, right, and what that results in is the extreme wealth disparity that we have now, and when the wealthy have that amount of wealth, they have billions of dollars to spend on political campaigns and to, continue to feed that vicious cycle of class warfare, right? Where they continue to able to get tax cuts for themselves and, take our democracy and use it for their own benefit, and take our regulatory agencies and skew their regulations to benefit the large corporations as opposed to the American worker, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's you get this big picture, right? Of class war.
Definitely a big picture.
It's class warfare, right? And I think that, if we want a better democracy, we have to, stop allowing large campaign contributions from wealthy donors and large corporations, right?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with that for sure.
Yeah, and because we allow that, we end up creating a system where capital is much more valued than labor, and those who have capital are able to benefit without contributing anything to the economy materially. Right?
Well, I thought you were going to connect it that when we have more big political donations, the citizens gets misrepresented.
Oh yeah, that's implicit in that system.
Sure.
Right? When the government makes decisions on the behalf of big money, they're making those decisions
for a minority
at the behest of the majority, right?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, but I think we've summarized our positions.
Yeah,
enough.
yeah, I think so. I don't know. I mean, let me pose a question to you. I mean, it's the same topic, right? But what do you think? Like, you recognize that, money could be used in a more utilitarian way, right? So what would be some steps that you would propose taking to use that money in a more utilitarian way?
Are you talking about the money of the wealthy who have made their money and now need to somehow create more beneficial things to the market?
Yeah, I mean, let's not talk about the first generation entrepreneurs. Let's talk about the old wealth families that have money
how
left
can
over
we
from,
sure.
I don't know, plantations and owning large amounts of factories in the Industrial Revolution, or the Rockefellers, right? They're and a lot of these families become philanthropic, right? The Rockefellers, my aunt works with them a lot and tries to get their money to go to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, right? But I think that, having private donors decide themselves what the best use of their money is not a utilitarian way of using that money, right? I think that they're swayed by emotion, right? They don't have.
So what steps would I take?
Yeah, sorry, I'm rambling on.
No,
here.
no,
But
yeah,
I don't know.
So what steps would I take to use the wealth that's been created from our system in a more useful way? Well, it's a complicated question. There's a lot of steps to it, but one step could be increase taxes on the wealthy so that the money that the government gets could be used for more money in for education or for whatever. And so that's a very valid argument that you could make, that because these people already have so much wealth and the materials that they can get with their money is stagnating, that they don't. There's nothing else that they need. I mean, $69 billion, nice, but but yeah. So that's a practical step you could take. Another practical step you could take would be promoting philanthropy with the upper class, right? And by saying, hey, it kind of kind of incentivizing them to donate more money to organizations, charities rather.
Yeah.
And I think that's another practical step you could take. And there's a lot of practical steps you could take, but I don't think a very practical step you can take is saying, well, we should just kill all the wealthy people and steal all their money, right? Like that doesn't sound good at all.
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't. A guillotine in Central Park.
Yeah.
Chopping off that's of Wall Street bankers. I mean, it's not rational, but
no.
I don't know. I feel like unless we make drastic steps, that's the road that it's going towards. You know what I mean? Like unless, making, patching up the holes in the leaking bucket of American society, with, little bits of legislation and, small changes and, little increases in welfare programs is not sufficient to overcome the massive gap that we have right now and the massive amount of suffering and pain that the American people are going through. And I think that unless we make some drastic changes, it's going to go in that direction, right? That eventually the working people of this country are going to be so fed up that they look to the most drastic option. And that's where you get a guillotine in Central Park, right? And
well, I don't know if there's any evidence to suggest that that's coming.
Yeah, it happened in France, right?
Well,
when
again,
the monarchy got so overwhelmingly rich and the aristocrats just spent their money and flaunted it, right? While the working people of France suffered and weren't able to pay for the most basic necessities of their life, they cut off their heads.
Yeah,
right?
well, you can make an argument here that the people who took the monarchy to the guillotine, right? Those people were truly oppressed. Mm-hmm. There's an argument to be made in America by saying that we're not actually truly oppressed. There are things that are bad, but to be a poor person in America is like being a rich person anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
And so, I'm not entirely convinced that there's just all this rampant suffering between the lower class.
Yeah.
I completely agree that there's kind of a suppression of democratic values in America by the wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty apparent.
Yeah.
But I don't. Things could definitely get better, but I don't see this rampant oppression of the lower class by the upper class. Like I don't know. There is. Bad things happen to the lower class because of the rich people. Like you were talking about the whatever
Meals on Wheels, bro.
Meals on Wheels. Like that's terrible.
Horrible, right?
It's terrible.
Yeah.
But
I think that there's no real clear antidote to that, right? I think that. I've worked at Sprouts, right, with my coworkers that are, single moms with 2 kids, right, and they, make $12 an hour, and to me, it's baffling how they're able to reconcile the schedule of being a mother, right, and being there for your child, and providing for your child, and only making $12 an hour, right? To me, that seems nearly impossible, right, and the amount of people in America that go through that same struggle is incredibly high, right? People that, have to work shitty jobs making little to no money, and trying to be a good parent is incredibly high. And
definitely. Well, I think another thing is
like,
we see how much money we have in America.
Yeah.
And we still see that, people actually can't provide healthcare or can't provide money for healthcare. We're like, what the hell?
Yeah.
We have so much money in America. Why are there still people who can't pay for insulin?
Yeah.
And,
it makes me pissed, bro. Like,
no, I totally understand
mad, bro. Yeah.
I definitely understand it. And so we see all this potential that America can have with improving the lives of its citizens, and, things are not truly changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been the same way for the entire history.
And I understand it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just skeptical about the means of doing it. Like that's really where my skepticism lies. It's not necessarily in like the actual things that you're promoting, like universal healthcare. Dude, it's ultimately desirable.
Yeah.
You know, countries around the world have been doing it successfully, and we're the most developed, arguably the most developed country in the world,
and we're the wealthiest nation in the history of the world ever. Right, we have so much wealth. It's almost unbelievable by historical standards, right? And
and we still don't have healthcare provided by the government. And so we see all this, and we have so much wealth that it's baffling to think that there's still these terrible conditions that people are living in.
Yeah.
And and the only thing I'm truly skeptical about is like the means of wiping away, all that, wiping away the impoverished people's,
Mhm.
woes.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what I'm skeptical about, because I've done a little bit of research into communist societies, and what they saw that they had.
You gotta read Marx, bro.
Look, man, I've read some Marx. I haven't read a lot,
I mean,
but
don't like the Communist Manifesto is a bad
representation.
Bad
you think?
represent. It's like 40 pages, right? Like I don't know. Like you really gotta read Capital, right? And it's daunting.
It's
And
fat,
it's
dude. It's
so
a big
fat.
book.
Read the abridged version. I'd say it's only like 1,000 pages,
Jeez.
which is it's fat still.
Have you
but
read it?
Yeah,
Jeez,
the abridged version. Yeah, not,
The abridged,
not
not the
read, like,
unabridged.
7,000.
He probably has like
That's
he probably has like 4,000 pages
yeah,
just on rant
yeah,
about whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But like when you, I don't know. It's I think it's easy to look at the world through individual anecdotes, right, and talk about particular families and talk about, this person did this and this is why they get this, and this other person made bad decisions in their life and that's why they are where they are. Like it's easy to take those individual perspectives and use them to justify the status quo. But when you take a step back and look at it from a class perspective, right, that there are certain decisions that benefit one class and hurt the other, right, and our system benefits one class and hurts the other, right, that perspective, it makes things a lot clearer in a way. You know what I mean?
Again,
Like-
but I think there's but again,
And
my
it- and
perspective
it does
isn't.
oversimplify things.
It does.
It
It does.
oversimplifies things,
And
by
at the
ignoring-
cost of details. Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the oversimplification comes at the cost of details.
Mhm, yeah.
So mainly the way that I've been looking at the United States is through a hierarchical structure. That again, there's going to be your Michael Jordans. There's going to be the people who can't shoot a basketball
Yeah.
in the hoop for their life.
Yeah.
And I see that is natural to all animals. It's natural to all to all structures, to all things that are set in place. Whenever you create a game of basketball, you create Michael Jordan. Whenever you create anything, you create the people who are just going to be great at it.
Yeah.
And so I see that as natural, and I don't think we should get rid of it. And I don't think you do either.
Yeah, no, I think that ultimately we should strive to make it meritocratic.
I agree. I think that
Right.
people, okay, but that would, again, the way that you make it meritocratic is where the debate comes in.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And, I think that, yeah, we're talking in circles at this point.
we are.
But
We're being redundant. But
allowing extreme wealth to create more extreme wealth is inherently unmeritocratic, right? Because that person, it's irregardless of their skill or their talent or whether they're a Michael Jordan or me playing basketball, they're going to make the same amount of wealth off of that extreme amount of wealth, because wealth in itself can just make more money regardless of the skill of the person that's receiving that wealth, right? And you can make the argument that the people that have that amount of wealth have talent, have skill because they got there in the first place. But if we want to make it a meritocratic system, it should be based on the skill and the talent of your labor, and doing so requires curtailing the amount of money you can make off just having money, right? If you have an empty, anonymous, blank box, right, and that box has $1 million, they can make a lot of money off of it, regardless of what they do, right? And I think that is a step towards, abolishing that is a step towards meritocracy, right? And to bring one final point, I think that in order to get capital investments for projects, you need to reward those capital investments. However, I think that the best way to do that, or not the best way, but the way to do that while still promoting meritocracy is through interest on loans, right? And I think that by curtailing the process of buying influence over an institution and reaping those benefits through, I don't know, buying up all the stock of a company, right? And now you're able to reap all the benefits that company brings. Instead, if you make all investments through the process of giving out loans and investments, at the end of the day, the same amount of money will be invested, right? However, it can be done in a way that is meritocratic, and the market for loans will accommodate that, and you'll get loans for risk investments at high interest rates and safe investments at low interest rates, and the money will still be provided for those capital projects, but you can sort of curtail the unlimited amount of money a person can make off of one simple investment, right? Which leads to the incredible wealth disparity that we have now. Yeah.
I think those are really good closing remarks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we gave pretty good summaries of both our positions.
Yeah. I don't know. Once again,
you get frustrated sometimes.
It makes you so mad, bro. I just fucking get so pissed seeing all the suffering and horrible things that happen every day in America.
Yeah,
and
well,
I just have to like come up with some way to rectify it. And it's been great talking to you to try to strengthen my position, right? Because when it's just me sitting in my car thinking alone, I'm like, fuck yeah, dude. That's a way to do it, right? But by having the sort of Socratic discourse about it, it's able to help me strengthen my position. And
you just come out smarter from it, you know what I mean? Like, again, we always say this at the end of our podcast.
I know.
Like we always
just
wrap
pat
it up
ourselves on the back.
Like, I love this.
Fuck yeah, bro.
But dude, honestly, the podcast has really been beneficial for just my education, right? Because like, you're a really smart dude.
You too, bro. And like I really respect your opinion.
I see. Yeah, I think that's another point why this has been so beneficial for both of us. Is that we actually understand that the other person has something valuable to say. That I can learn from. And it's not like we're both just projecting our arguments against each other.
And it's good to argue against something that's not a straw man. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like not just like take the best or the worst of the opposite and just beat that up, because that's easy as shit. You know what I mean? And instead, having a real discourse about, the core of the issue. I feel like we're just circle jerking at this point, Like, oh yeah, we're fucking great, bro.
But I mean, it's but again, like I don't know. It feels like today, and I don't want to get off onto this long tangent, but it feels like today that there's this drastic misrepresentation of the other person's argument because that's an easy thing to do. And I don't think that's very beneficial for the people in partaking in that. Because then you just you become, oh well, that person's just fucking stupid. Right. And they don't have anything valuable to say. And when you think that, like, you become more stupid yourself. So definitely.
Well, I don't know. It's a good place to wrap it up.
I think so. Yeah.
Always. We'll talk for like 2 hours at this point. Like,
2 hours, 46 minutes.
All right. Good stuff.
All right. This has been the Outlet Podcast with Gabe and Eric. I'm Gabe, and that's Eric. And you can catch us, every Fridays now?
Yeah. That's the schedule now.
If you made it and you're not subscribed to this point, I don't know what to tell you.
Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell button. Give us a comment. Let us know what you think. Give us comments, man. Like,
even if it's like, I hated you.
And
all your points are stupid.
Be a part of the Socratic discourse. Give us some feedback on what's some dumb stuff we said. Because I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that needs to be pointed out.
Sure, just put like a timestamp.
Wow,
this was retarded.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyways, thank you all for listening, and hope you guys are doing well.
Yeah.